Now on Radio 2, live from the BBC's Maida Vale studios, Jeremy Vine, Dermot O'Leary and Louise Minchin with the Assassination of JFK, minute by minute.
BBC Radio 2.
It's 3 minutes past 6 on Friday, the 22nd of November, 2013. Exactly 50 years ago, the youngest president the United States has ever known is being driven through the outskirts of Dallas. Beside him is his wife, the most photographed woman on earth. The sun is shining and the car top is down, so the Texas crowds can see the golden couple clearly as they pass by. In short, the reception is ecstatic.
There's the gunmetal gray limousine. The President and Mrs. Kennedy seated on the back seat. A flying wedge of some 12 Dallas police motorcycles leading the way.
Kennedy is the first pin-up president. He and his wife have youth and glamour. It's the perfect combination for the 1960s. A prosperous decade throwing off the gloom of the post-war world. They are the future.
Come fly with me, let's fly away.
The circle surrounding the Kennedys is equally glamorous. Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin are among their friends. Marilyn Monroe, it's rumoured, is more than a friend to the president.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
America may be the world's greatest superpower, but the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis and Russia's lead in the space race have dented US confidence. Right now, though, in sunny Dallas, such thoughts are far away.
Just a few miles from the motorcade on the 6th floor of an old Victorian warehouse, a young man is arranging boxes by a window, arranging them so he can't be seen. On the floor, close by, is a Second World War rifle, bought from a mail-order catalogue.
We are not at all communist controlled, regardless of the fact that I have the experience of living in Russia.
In 26 minutes' time, President John F. Kennedy will pass by that open window, and with 3 shots, the course of history will be changed. In the process, everyone will learn the name of that young man on the 6th floor.
Attention all squads. The suspect in the shooting is reported to be an unknown white male, approximately 30.
This is the Assassination of JFK, minute by minute. Such is the fascination with the events in Dallas 50 years ago that fact and fiction have become blurred. Tonight, though, we're concerned not with conspiracy theories, but with facts. We start this program just before the assassination of one president, and will end at 9 o'clock tonight with the hasty swearing in of another. We'll take you, minute by minute, through the story of 2 shootings, a murder hunt, a violent arrest, and the drama of hundreds of people caught up in events they'll never, ever forget. I'm Jeremy Vine. With me to tell the story is Louise Minchin from BBC Breakfast and my Radio 2 colleague Dermot O'Leary.
We'll track the story tonight through powerful first-hand eyewitness accounts recorded especially for this programme. We'll also have the words of key people brought to life in some cases for the first time by a band of actors here in the studio.
I used to think if I only had been looking to the right, I would have seen the first shot hit him. Then I could have pulled him down, and then the second would not have hit him.
And there'll be rarely heard archive from the period showing how the news sweeps across Dallas, the US and the rest of the world.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
On the other side of the studio, we have 21 musicians with musical director Mike Dixon, who, as you can hear, will be providing a live music soundtrack to the events as they unfold. And we have a great lineup of guest singers. You'll hear from Eliza Doolittle, Alfie Boe, Paul Carrick, I Am Clute and others, each performing a song that has a particular resonance as the story unfolds.
And amongst other special contributors, we have a man for whom this is not history, this is part of his life story. Bruce Cowie, a black watch piper who played at JFK's funeral 50 years ago. So the three of us sitting here in, of course, British time, but looking at a clock on the wall that says Dallas time, and just strikes me, Dermot, Louise, how many details have been forgotten from the day?
And for me, it's very much the personal tragedy that you forget. For Jackie Kennedy's point of view, there she is. She wasn't even meant to be campaigning that day, was she? And she's on that limousine, and her husband is shot in front of her and collapses in front of her. I mean, It's just such a personal tragedy.
Yeah, for me, it's my family all grew up being Catholics and Irish Catholics, sort of eulogising Kennedy, and he was from my family's hometown in Wexford, and he visited there in June '63. I spoke to my mum last night on the phone, and we've talked about this many times, but she met Kennedy and shook his hand, and he was kind of like family to the Irish.
You met him.
That's extraordinary, isn't it?
Story trumps all the stories.
Oh, she brings it out every dinner party, let me tell you.
So we're going to be following it minute by minute. In Dallas, it's coming up to 12:10. In the UK, 6:10. The presidential motorcade left Love Field Airport on the outskirts of Dallas just a few moments ago. In half an hour, the president is due to make a speech at the Dallas Trade Mart as a guest of the city. He's travelling in the back of a large midnight blue limousine.
It looks like a police convention. We have never seen as many Dallas police officers in one location in all of our years of covering Dallas news, but they are here in great profusion. Nothing left to chance. Every possible precaution has been taken.
The temperature is in the 70s and Jackie is feeling overdressed in a pink wool suit and matching pillbox hat. In the seats in front of them are John Connolly, the governor of Texas, and his wife Nellie.
As JFK got into the car, the eagle-eyed will have seen him wince. He suffers from acute back pain and is wearing a brace to keep his spine straight. Sometimes it's so bad he uses crutches, but never in public. The back brace will play a crucial part in the tragedy that's about to unfold.
Behind the president's limousine, at a regulation distance of 5 feet, is a car so large it's nicknamed the Queen Mary. It carries 8 Secret Service agents, all armed. The rest of the motorcade stretches for half a mile.
Earlier that morning, JFK had addressed a crowd of 2,000 people at a fundraising breakfast in Fort Worth. On stage with him are Jackie and the Vice President, Lyndon Johnson.
2 years ago, I introduced myself in Paris by saying that I was the man who had accompanied Mrs. Kennedy to Paris. I'm getting that same sensation as I travel around Texas. Nobody wonders what Lyndon and I wear.
It would be Kennedy's last public speech. Jackie had never campaigned before and hadn't planned to on this trip. In August, their baby son Patrick had died at just a few days old. She'd been expecting to be at the White House nursing him. Secret Service agent Clint Hill, now 81, was Jackie's personal bodyguard.
Mrs. Kennedy became very depressed. The president was very, very upset. They had looked very much forward to having this new child in their lives. And even the agents, myself included, it affected us a great deal because we had been with her through all this pregnancy and we saw how much they wanted this child. And so it was depressing for all of us.
Today, Clint Hill and the rest of the Secret Service are concerned about safety on the motorcade. They refer to JFK as the boss. He had half-jokingly spoken to one of their supervisors 4 days earlier.
Keep the Ivy League charlatans off the back of the car.
A reference to their youth and sharp suits. Kennedy doesn't want the agents blocking his view of the crowd.
Hugh Ainsworth was a reporter on the Dallas Morning News. He would find himself right in the middle of the day's drama. Hugh spoke to us earlier.
Well, Dallas at that time was not a pleasant place for Mr. Kennedy to come to. Dallas was festering. It was mean. And it really was.
Earlier this morning, JFK had said to Jackie,
"We're heading into nut country today. You know, last night would have been a hell of a night to assassinate a president. There was the rain and the night, and we were all getting jostled. Suppose a man had a pistol in a briefcase."
The president pointed his index finger at the wall and jerked his thumb twice, imitating a gun.
And then melted away in the crowd.
Well, here with us live throughout the programme are the writer Bonnie Greer, who was a teenager in the US in 1963, and also Tony Badger, Professor of American History at Cambridge University and Chair of the Kennedy Memorial Trust. Bonnie, what did you make of JFK as a teenager growing up there?
Well, first of all, he was gorgeous. You know, when you're a little teenage girl, you know, you're just into pop stars, and he looked like one. And he had a most incredible wife. We all had little paper dolls of Jackie's clothes and her life in the White House. She'd just done a sort of guide through the White House itself, first time she'd been on TV. She was just gorgeous. They were just gorgeous, and they were our president and our first lady.
Tony Badger, how dangerous was it as well for them both together to be going to Dallas?
Pretty dangerous. There were a lot of people who hated Kennedy. Rich oil and gas executives hated his economic policies. Paranoid right-wing extremists in the John Burke Society thought he was soft on communism, or was a communist himself. Segregationists hated his civil rights policies. And they showed it to various visitors violently before Kennedy came.
So, Tony, why did he have to go there?
He needed money for the 1964 campaign, and he needed votes. He was trailing Barry Goldwater, the possible candidate in 1964. He was trailing him 52 to 48.
And he had to win Texas.
He had to win Texas.
Sure.
And they'd only just won it in 60.
Thank you. Thank you, Bonnie and Tony. For now, we'll come back to you later on. Now, at the start of the Kennedy presidency, 3 years before, there was no talk of assassination. His campaign had been one of optimism. It even had its own theme song, sung by one of his most high-profile supporters, Frank Sinatra. So here's Anthony Strong and our own studio orchestra live with the JFK campaign version of the famous swing tune, High Hopes.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Everyone is voting for Jack. He has got what all the rest lack. Everyone wants to back Jack. Jack is on the right track, 'cause he's got high hopes. He's got high hopes. 1960's the year for his high hopes. Come on and vote for Kennedy, and we'll come out on top. Oops, there goes the opposition curb plop. K-E-double-N-E-D-Y, Jack's the nation's favorite guy. Everyone wants to back Jack. Jack is on the right track, 'cause he's got high hopes. He's got high hopes. 1960's the year for these high hopes. Come on and vote for Kennedy, make America strong. Kennedy, he just keeps rolling. Kennedy keeps on strolling. Kennedy keeps on rolling along. Yes, he'd had high hopes. He's got high hopes. 1960's the year for his high hopes. Come on and vote for Kennedy. Vote for Kennedy. Keep America strong. Kennedy, he just keeps rolling. Kennedy keeps strolling. Kennedy just keeps rolling along. Vote for Kennedy.
Yeah, makes you smile, doesn't it? High hopes sung for JFK, reminding us of the optimism of the early 60s. It's BBC Radio 2 and you're listening to the Assassination of JFK, minute by minute. In a house in the Dallas suburbs, 22-year-old Marina Oswald is watching television coverage of Kennedy's visit. Marina had woken up feeling depressed, but the TV pictures are really cheering her up. She'd arrived from Russia a couple of years ago, so her English isn't good enough to understand everything the commentators are saying.
The night before, she'd rowed with her husband and he'd left for work the house without it being resolved. The woman Marina is lodging with, Ruth Payne, is in the kitchen preparing lunch. They get on well, drawn together by the fact Ruth speaks Russian, and they're both having to deal with difficult marriages. Lee sometimes beats Marina, and Ruth's husband moved out of the house a few months ago.
Lee Harvey Oswald is at work at the Texas Book Depository. It's an old building in a new Dallas development called Dealey Plaza. Oswald is a stock boy. They pick up orders for school books, find the books, and then take them to the shipping desk.
While the other stock boys have their lunch, Lee Harvey Oswald has been busy. Alone on the 6th floor, he's arranging cardboard boxes around him, close to a window with a good view of the route. Oswald is now placing a box by the window on which to rest his mail-order Italian World War II rifle. He knows what he is doing. He was in the Marines and won an award for marksmanship. He has 4 bullets. Oswald had been chairman of the New Orleans Fair Play for Cuba Committee. In August 1963, he'd given an interview to radio station WDSU.
The principles of the Fair Play for Cuba consist of restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba. That is one of our main points. We are not at all communist controlled, regardless of the fact that I have the experience of living in Russia, regardless of the fact that we have been investigated.
So, Professor Tony Badger, who is Lee Harvey Oswald?
He's a chronic loner who said as a teenager that he disliked everybody. But he joined the Marines and then left the Marines and defected to the Soviet Union. Worked there, got disillusioned, and came back to the United States.
So, so he really is a nomad. I mean, he sort of belongs nowhere. Because he went to Russia and it didn't work out for him there either, right?
Yeah, except that he married Marina and they had 2 young children.
And he comes from a dysfunctional family, doesn't he?
The mother is very overbearing and the father is not there.
All right, thank you, Tony Badger, for now.
So, back to Dallas. Although many people are afraid that Kennedy would get a hostile reception, the streets are packed. Bob Halfaker was a reporter for KRLD News.
I showed up and set up in the canyons of downtown Dallas, and I realized that in sharp contrast to anything resembling a protest, this was a rounding endorsement for the president. These people showed up with smiles on their faces, children in their arms. They came to cheer the president and his beautiful wife.
On the motorcade route, President Kennedy calls out to his driver, Bill Greer, to stop. He's seen a group of children with a large handwritten sign saying,
"Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands. Our neighbors said you wouldn't."
His car is soon surrounded by screaming children, and the Secret Service agents struggle to keep order.
It worked! Our sign worked!
Bill Greer moves off and the motorcade turns onto Main Street, and he has to drive on the left-hand side of the road to keep the president, who's on the right of the car, away from the crowd spilling off the sidewalks.
Secret Service agent Clint Hill ignores the boss's order and gets on the rear step of the car, crouching as low as he can. He's concerned that someone might try and grab Jackie. After guarding her for 3 years, he knows that she hates crowds. People are hanging out of the windows, cheering and waving.
In the car behind the president, Special Assistant Kenny O'Donnell is on his feet and is delighted. He says to fellow aide Dave Powers,
"There's certainly nothing wrong with this crowd."
Secret Service agent Clint Hill.
He always wanted that open car whenever there were crowds because he wanted them to feel that he was available to them, that there was not anything between he and the people.
Kenny O'Donnell's particularly pleased to see that Jackie has followed his advice and is staying turned to her side of the street so that everyone gets a glimpse of at least one of the couple.
A few blocks away, nightclub owner Jack Ruby is hanging around the offices of the Dallas Morning News, hoping to persuade the paper's nightclub reporter Tony Zoppi to use a photo of one of his strippers.
Ruby has a hair-trigger temper. He once threw a drunk down the stairs of one of his clubs and then proceeded to kick him as he tried to stumble away. He did the same a few days ago to someone who mocked President Kennedy.
The time in Dallas is 24 minutes past 12. Across town, Arnold Rowland and his wife Barbara are standing opposite the book depository. Something catches Arnold's eye.
I noticed on the 6th floor of the building that there was a man back from the window. He was standing and holding a rifle. This appeared to me to be a fairly high-powered rifle because of the scope and the relative proportion of the scope to the rifle. And we thought momentarily that maybe we should tell someone.
Howard Brennan, a 44-year-old steam fitter who's just finished his lunch at a nearby cafe, is looking at the man too and thinking he looks like he's in his own little world.
Senator Ralph Yarborough, riding with Johnson, is looking uneasily at the people in the windows on Main Street. Although the sidewalks are full of Kennedy fans, above them the faces are hard and unimpressed.
The motorcade passes reporter Bob Huffaker.
And from up above the windows of those tall buildings, out came confetti and ticker tape to add festivities to the parade. So it was a sweet, sweet time as the president passed my vantage point at Main and Akron.
Sitting in front of Jackie Kennedy, Nellie Connolly is listening to the president saying,
"Thank you, thank you, thank you."
She wonders why he bothers. No one can hear him. Whenever Jackie waves her white-gloved hand, the crowd goes wild.
I usually would be waving mostly to the left side, and Jack was waving mostly to the right, which is one reason you're not looking at each other very much. And it was terribly hot, just blinding all of us.
The crowds are thinner as they near the end of Main Street, so Clint Hill jumps off the back of the president's Lincoln and heads back to the follow-up car.
Dallas time now 27 minutes past 12. .58-year-old Dallas dressmaker Abraham Zapruder is clutching his 8mm Bell & Howell home movie camera. This morning his secretary sent him home to get it, saying,
"How many times will you have a crack at color movies of the president?"
Zapruder is standing on a concrete block about 4 feet off the ground, and he's got a good view of the street. He's hoping he doesn't get dizzy and fall over, looking down the telescopic lens. Oswald gets in position. behind a partially open window.
Bob Edwards and Ronald Fisher are on their lunch break, standing on the edge of the curb. Bob punches Ronald on the shoulder.
Look at that guy there in that window. He looks like he's hiding from someone amongst those boxes.
Marina Oswald spoke to a reporter about her husband a few months later.
He always seemed like a man deeply hurt by something, and I always felt somewhat like a mother to him. Felt I was helping him in some way. I've always thought what a shame that something or somebody had made him the way that he was.
Nellie Connolly is speaking to the president.
I just turned around and said to him, "You can't say Dallas doesn't love you, Mr. President."
Reporter Hugh Ainsworth is opposite the book depository.
We could hear that they were on the way. We could hear the motorcycles and the people that preceded them. And then here they came by, and it was so exciting. I was on the side where the president was and Connolly was. I was right in the middle of Elm Street. Had I looked up, I could have seen him in the window.
Chief Curry in the lead car is easily making the turn into Elm Street, but for Bill Greer in the 21-foot Lincoln, it's harder. The car almost stops.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark.
On the 5th floor of the depository, Bonnie Ray Williams can see JFK push his hair back from his face. Abraham Zapruder starts filming.
So, Abraham Zapruder is filming the scene. Now, Agent Rufus Youngblood in the Vice President's car is looking at the time. He searches for the clock he can see most visibly. It's on top of the depository building itself, where Lee Harvey Oswald is. And it says the time is 12:30. That is the time in Dallas now. The convoy is running only 5 minutes late.
Secret Service agent Clint Hill is looking at some open windows in the depository, but he's unconcerned as there have been plenty of open windows during the drive through Dallas. In the crowd, a large woman in a pink dress is shouting,
"She's got my dress on! She's got my dress on!"
On the pavement, Charles Brim holds up Joe, his 5-year-old son, to see the president. Joe waves, and the president waves back.
The car starts to move downhill, away from the book depository. Looking through his telescopic sight 190 feet away, Lee Harvey Oswald sees the president's limousine emerge from behind a tree.
The president is waving. Jackie is looking straight ahead. Oswald squeezes the trigger of the rifle.
We could see a tunnel in front of us. Everything was really slow then, and I remember thinking it would be so cool under that tunnel.
The bullet leaves the barrel at 1,700 feet per second.
On the street, Virgie Rachley is surprised to see sparks fly off the pavement behind the president's limousine. A splinter of concrete hits car salesman James Tagg's cheek. People think it's a firecracker. Oswald has missed his target.
20-year-old James Worrell Jr. looks up. He can see a gun barrel sticking out of a window.
The second bullet hits the president in the back, passing through his throat and hitting Governor Connolly, going through his chest and shattering a rib. Now travelling backwards, the bullet hits Connolly's wrist and ends up embedded in his left thigh.
Connolly looks down at the blood pouring from his chest.
My God, they're gonna kill us all.
He slumps towards Nellie, but Kennedy doesn't fall. His back brace keeps him upright and an easy target.
Jackie looks at Connolly and then turns to her husband, who has a quizzical look on his face.
2 cars behind, Agent Rufus Youngblood shoves Vice President Johnson down into his seat and lies on top of him to shield him, his knees in his back.
In the car behind the president, Secret Service agent Clint Hill sees the second bullet hit.
President grabbed at his throat and he lurched to his left. I knew he was in trouble, and so I jumped from the car I was on and ran toward the presidential limousine to form a shield. to prevent anything further from happening.
Schoolboy Amos Ewins is staring at what looks to him like a pipe sticking out of the 6th floor window. He can see a man holding it.
Clint Hill grabs the handrail at the back of the limo, but loses his footing.
8.4 seconds after his first shot, Oswald fires for a third time. Jackie is leaning towards her husband's face.
And just as I turned and looked at him, I could see a piece of his skull. And I remember it was flesh-colored. I remember thinking he just looked as if he had a slight headache. And I just remember seeing that. No blood or anything.
In the confusion, Clint Hill is making a final attempt to jump onto the rear of the car, and he gets a grip just as Bill Greer hits the accelerator.
I was getting up on the back of the car, and Mrs. Kennedy was trying to come out on the trunk of the car to retrieve something that had come off the president's head. She did not know I was there, and I pushed her back into the seat, and then the president's body fell to its left onto her lap.
And then I just remember falling on him and saying, "Oh, no, no, no. Oh, my God, they've shot my husband." I remember I was shouting and just being down in the car with his head in my lap, and it just seemed an eternity.
His right side of his face was up. I could see his eyes were fixed, that there was a hole in his skull above his right ear to the rear, about the size of my palm, and I was quite sure the shot had been fatal.
A few feet away, Charles Brem throws himself over his 5-year-old son, Joe. He knows gunfire, having been shot in the chest on D-Day. As the car heads under the railway underpass, Abraham Zapruder stops filming. He's in shock.
They killed him. They killed him.
I used to think if I had only been looking to the right, I would have seen the first shot hit him. Then I could have pulled him down, and then the second would not have hit him.
On Elm Street, Howard Brennan is watching the man on the 6th floor.
He drew the gun back from the window as though he was drawing it back to his side, and maybe paused for another second as though to assure himself that he hit his mark. And then he disappeared.
Brennan wants to scream but can't utter a sound.
Oswald is now running towards the staircase at the rear of the depository. He drops his rifle between some large packing cases, puts another box on top to conceal it, and heads down the stairs.
In the plaza, reporter Piers Ullman thinks a couple lying on the ground have been hit.
I said, "Are you all right?" And he was beating the ground with his fist, saying, "My God, they shot him, they shot him."
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
Clint Hill is hanging onto the back of the speeding car, and he's watching a pitiful sight. Jackie Kennedy is cradling her husband's head in her lap, saying,
Jack, can you hear me? I love you, Jack."
Through a windshield splattered with blood, the agents in the car behind are looking at Clint Hill beating his hands on the trunk of the car in despair.
I was the only agent who had the opportunity to do anything that day. I was the only one who had a chance, and I've always felt that I should have done better, gotten there faster, been able to get up on top of that car and take that third shot myself.
Put me on, Phil. Put me on. Phil, am I on? We're here at the trademark. The presidential car coming up now. We know it's the presidential car. You can see Mrs. Kennedy's pink suit. There's a Secret Service man, spread eagle, over the top of the car. We understand Governor and Mrs. Connolly are in the car with President and Mrs. Kennedy. We can't see who has been hit, if anybody's been hit, but apparently something is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong.
Sometimes Lee was a little bit sick, and sometimes I didn't know he wanted to be popular, so everyone know who is Lee Harvey Oswald.
Jackie's pink pillbox hat falls forward. She throws it onto the floor of the car, the hat pin tearing out her hair.
Well, performing live now with our studio orchestra is Andrea Triana with her own song, just capturing some of the emotion of that scene. It is called Song for a Friend.
all the broken pieces to fade and lay your head upon my shoulder till you wake and sleep. Through the stormy winter we'll escape, and you know I will be here at the end of the day. You know you're never alone, no. When times are hard, yes, I'll hold you close. Just let love heal you, and I'll do the same. And you know I will be here at the end of the day. Tears falling down your cheek, they'll compensate. And fears stealing from the softness of your face. How we pray we'll be turning corners out of this place. And you know I will be here at the end of the day. You know you're never alone. When times are hard, yes, I'll hold you close. Just let love heal you, and I'll do the same. And you know I will be here at the end of the day. The arms of love will pick you up, wrap you up till you catch your breath. You catch your breath. And through the storm and the skies, endless days and the sleepless nights, oh, well, I will be by your side. You know you're never alone, no. Oh, when times are hard, yes, I'll hold you close. Just let love heal you, and I'll do the same. And you know I will be here at the end of the day. You know I will be here at the end of the day. You know I'll be here at the end of the day.
Andrea Triana's Song for a Friend. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I was going to ask if that was written for this event, because it sounds like it was.
I think it was, yeah. It's about tragedy and about loss, so yeah, very deep song.
Extraordinary to hear this event play out in real time, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
BBC Radio 2, you're listening to the Assassination of JFK minute by minute. If you want to tweet us, it's at BBC Radio 2, hashtag R2JFK. Louise, Dermot, anything coming in?
Yes, lots of people tweeting already. Thank you for those. Anthony Tony Carroll remembers the day. He says, I remember the day clearly. I was 8 years old, sat in my grandparents' house watching the news on TV in black and white, of course.
A lot of the tweets are about people that remember where they are on the day, obviously. Jane Mannering's, I was 7 years old and remember the news flash coming in on the TV, my whole family being shocked at the scene, a day I'll never forget. And Elaine Bryant, that day is indelibly imprinted on my mind. I was in the lounge and I heard the news come through on the radio. I just burst into tears. Where has 50 years gone? Like Jeremy said, do keep them coming in at BBC Radio 2, hashtag R2JFK.
About a minute after the shooting, Lee Harvey Oswald had got down as far as the second floor of the depository when he heard someone coming up the other way and had darted into the second floor lunchroom.
Policeman Marion Baker had raced into the depository. He knew that's where the shots had come from and had seen Oswald walking away from him and had drawn his gun. The building's manager, Ron Truley, was with the cop.
Come here! Sir, do you know this man?
Sure, this is Lee Oswald, one of our stock boys.
I was suspicious of everybody because I had my pistol out. He never did say a word or nothing. In fact, he didn't change his expression one bit.
Baker, convinced the gunman must be someone who doesn't work in the building, turned and ran up the stairs.
Dallas time is now 12:43. Robert McNeil of NBC News is running into the depository. He sees a man leaving and asks him where the nearest telephones are. That man is Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald points into the depository where a man is on the phone.
Better ask him.
And walks off, heading for a bus that will take him to his rooming house in Marcellus. Robert McNeil misses a major scoop.
Hugh Ainsworth of the Dallas Morning News is out on Dealey Plaza looking for witnesses. He himself had been only a few feet away from Kennedy when he was shot, but Hugh wasn't expecting to be a reporter that day.
Didn't have a pencil or paper or pen or anything. And I saw this young boy with a huge jumbo pencil with an American flag on the eraser, and I grabbed it from him, gave him 2 quarters and ran. And I reached in my back pocket, and fortunately I hadn't mailed my 2 utility bills. So then I had something to write on. And the first man I ran into was right in front of me, and he kept pointing at that window, that 6th floor window. His name was Howard Brennan. He kept saying, "He's up there, I saw him up there."
The president's limousine has screeched to a halt by the emergency room entrance at the rear of Parkland. Governor Connolly is being cradled by his wife Nellie. President Kennedy by Jackie. Secret Service agents are surrounding the car, some with submachine guns. Journalist Merriman Smith spots Agent Clint Hill.
How is he? He's dead, Smitty.
Smith heads inside the hospital to find a phone so he can call his news agency UPI.
Now Dave Powers, JFK's aide for nearly 20 years, is weeping over the body of his friend. The back seat is covered in blood and there's a fragment of skull next to JFK.
Jackie is holding her husband's head and weeping. Clint Hill begs her to allow them to get the president to a doctor.
I'm not going to let him go, Mr. Hill. You know he's dead. Let me alone.
I pleaded with her to let us help the president, but she had a hold of his body and she didn't want to let go. I recognized the problem was she didn't want anybody to see the condition he was in because it was terrible. So I took off my suit coat and covered up his head, his upper back. And when I did that, she let go.
She looks up and Clint notices that the First Lady's face is spattered with blood.
Standing by the admission desk is teenage ambulance driver Audrey Reich. He stands rooted to the spot as a procession of injured people arrive. He spoke to the BBC shortly after.
The Vice President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, was being brought into the hospital. 2 men escorting him had him underneath the arms. He was very pale, looking as if he had suffered a heart attack or something. Then immediately following him, they brought in our governor of the state, John Connolly, and they rushed him by us. Immediately behind him, with about a 5-second lapse, they brought in this other gentleman who had a coat over his face.
On the radio networks, the news of the assassination is being broken.
We do not and cannot confirm the reports at this time that the president has been shot. One witness says he definitely was shot, that he was hit twice, that he saw the president slump in his seat. As I say, this is not confirmed at this time. I'm in the Texas School Book Depository building. They're bringing some witnesses in now. We will try to learn further and relay word to the station.
The president is being wheeled into Trauma Room 1. Jackie is holding his hand. Her pink hat and some of the red roses she was given at the airport are on his chest. A nurse suggests she wipe the blood off her clothing.
Absolutely not. I want the world to see what Dallas has done to my husband.
A 34-year-old surgeon, Dr. Malcolm Perry, arrives from the canteen still chewing his lunch. Throwing his jacket on the bloody floor of the trauma room, his first thought is that the president looks taller than he thought he would. His second is...
Here is the most important man in the world.
He can see short, rather jerky contractions of the president's chest and diaphragm as he pulls for air. Kennedy's eyes are open and staring. His body is covered with rose petals.
Diana Bowron, a 22-year-old nurse newly arrived from England, is cutting away JFK's clothes and back brace and removing his bloody gold wristwatch. She puts the watch in her pocket for safekeeping. His face is blue-white. Anaesthetist Dr. Marion Jenkins thinks that the president has
a death look.
Dr. Conrad Peters looks at the bandages that JFK used to wrap around his back brace that morning, thinking how odd it is for the President of the United States to be wearing a $3 dressing.
A plastic endotracheal tube connected to an automatic respirator has been inserted into Kennedy's mouth and down into his windpipe. It's clear to Dr. Perry that it isn't working. Air is leaking from a small wound in his throat. Perry then makes a large incision in the wound and inserts a tracheotomy tube. By now, there are half a dozen doctors trying to keep the president alive, watched by Secret Service agents and Kennedy aides.
Standing guard outside the trauma room is Sergeant Bob Duggar. He's looking so impassive and stern that Jackie wonders if he might dislike her husband. In fact, Duggar is a Kennedy Democrat who served in the Navy on torpedo boats, as Kennedy did, and is thinking,
why wasn't I killed instead of the president?
He just doesn't know what to say to Mrs. Kennedy.
In Trauma Room 2, the doctors are examining John Connolly's wounds. A doctor asks,
how many times was he shot? Once!
Connolly shouts. All the medics jump. They thought he was unconscious. The governor finally gets some sedation. A doctor examines Connolly's bloody head, looking for another wound, but then realises the blood and matter belong to President Kennedy.
When he heard the news of the shooting, radio reporter Bob Huffaker drove into Parkland at top speed.
I drove over the curb and pointed to my press pass and hoped that they wouldn't shoot or anything like that, and I was within about 150 feet of the emergency room door where they stopped me then, but I was close enough to be able to broadcast. The scene there was a terribly sad sight to behold. People who had seen far more than they had wanted to see, some of them. Senator Yarborough burst into tears when I questioned him.
This was a deed without a name. This is one of the most horrible crimes in American history, and it takes away the most brilliant leader I've ever known at a crucial time in the history of the world. This is an unspeakable tragedy to the family and to the nation.
Well, it's very powerful listening to these clips exactly 50 years on, some of the events almost to the second. And Bonnie Greer around the table, take us back to where you were when you heard this news.
Well, Chicago and Dallas are in the same time zone. So I'm in school, secondary school, my first year. I was one of a few black girls who had desegregated this Catholic girls' school. We just finished lunch. I was in my Latin class. And we had a sound over the tannoy. It was the head teacher, we call principal in the United States, who said, girls, come to the assembly. And we all went in, and she told us what happened. And one of my friends said, just piped up and said, does that mean that we Negroes will go back into slavery? And it was such a corny thing to hear. We started giggling out of just nerves, but then I realized we all sort of thought that when we were sitting there.
Wow. And for the rest of the day, then, I mean, did class carry on, or were you sent home?
We were dismissed,
yeah.
And I walked home. I wasn't far from home. It was raining outside, like in a corny movie, and everybody was crying on the streets. People were standing. It was lunchtime.
Was he popular in Chicago?
Pardon?
Was Kennedy popular in Chicago?
Kennedy was Irish. Of course he was. Of course he was. And his father also had a lot of business in Chicago. So of course he was. He was our guy.
So many people remember that moment. We're joined in the studio here by another special guest who met JFK just a fortnight before the assassination. Bruce Cowie was a member of the Black Watch Regiment who performed for JFK and his family on the White House lawn. Thanks very much for coming to see us, Bruce. You then went on to play at his funeral, didn't you? What happened?
When we were just in Lexington,
just coming off the bus when I was just waking up, actually, and the bus driver put the radio up loud and announced that he'd been assassinated. The show was cancelled that night. Everyone had the night off, but it was surreal. It was difficult to take in. A man that spoke to 9 days before. So
and then, because you'd met him and you played for him, Jackie Kennedy knew that she loved the pipes, and you went on to play actually at his funeral, didn't you?
Yes, the pipe major chose 8 pipers, and we were flown up to Washington. We piped from the White House up to the chapel, and that was us finished then, and we tailed off.
Thank you very much for coming here as well tonight, because I know later you are going to be playing the pipes for us again. I know you gave them away 5 years ago, but you are going to play again for us tonight with Alfie Boe as well and Danny Boy. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if, like Bruce, you have a story of being somewhere significant or maybe just personal to you, and you remember where you were when JFK was assassinated, at BBC Radio 2, hashtag R2JFK. Do tweet us, do get in touch. We'd love to read your comments out later on. Let's return to the drama at Parkland Hospital, and a song now by The Beatles that was written as a lullaby, but actually in this context it sounds also like a song of loss and regret. With us now, here, live at Maida Vale, is Eliza Doolittle with her version of Golden Slumbers.
Once there was a way to get back homeward. Once there was a way to get back. Sing a lullaby. Golden slumbers fill your eyes. Smiles awake you when you rise. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry. And I will sing a lullaby. Once there was a way to get back homeward. Once there was a way to get back home. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry. And I will sing a lullaby. Once there was a way to get back homeward. Once there was a way to get back home.
Eliza Doolittle, thank you so much for coming in to us here.
you.
Maida Vale, the original of that song, Golden Slumbers, of course, recorded just down the road by the Beatles. It's BBC Radio 2. You're listening live to the assassination of JFK, minute by minute, and we are from, of course, the studios here in Maida Vale.
Dallas time, now almost 1 o'clock. Mary Bledsoe is sitting on a bus heading towards the Dallas suburb of Marcellus. It's stuck in traffic, and suddenly the driver lets on a man who Mary recognises instantly as Lee Harvey Oswald, a tenant who'd rented a room for her a month before. He looks dirty with a hole in the elbow of his shirt. She deliberately doesn't catch his eye as he walks down the aisle. Mary never liked Oswald and asked him to leave the room he'd rented after only a week. When he left, she wished him
Good luck.
but then muttered,
Good riddance. I didn't like his attitude. He was just kind of like this, just big shot, and I didn't have anything to say to him. I didn't like him. I just didn't want him around me.
The bus is now stuck in traffic and Oswald gets off.
Just a few minutes ago, the President of the United States turned from Houston Street onto Elm Street on his way to a scheduled luncheon
Marina
appearance
Oswald
at
and
the
Ruth
Gethsemane
Payne are
Trademark.
watching the
And
news
at midnight,
bulletins.
he
Marina's
passed
English
through
isn't good enough to understand everything that's being said, and she's full of questions.
Was it serious? Is Jackie safe?
Ruth is translating and weeping as she does so.
It's a warm day in Virginia, and the president's brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, his wife Ethel, and 2 colleagues are having lunch at home by the pool. Ethel answers the phone. It's the White House, saying that J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, wants to talk to her husband. Ethel calls to Robert. He knows instantly there's a problem, as Hoover never calls him at home.
I have news for you. The president's been shot.
Kennedy asks if it's serious.
I think it's serious. I am endeavoring to get details. I'll call you back when I find out more.
Kennedy staggers towards his wife.
Jack's been shot. It may be fatal.
At Granada Studios in Manchester, the news of the shooting is being handed to the Scene at 6:30 regional news presenter Mike Scott, who then reads it live to camera. This is the first news that a British audience has had of the shooting.
The other ITV networks are running a recorded pop show, Ready, Steady, Go, but will later replace their scheduled programmes with news bulletins and recorded music. The BBC will receive complaints that after their announcement of the death of JFK, they ran The Harry Worth Show and Dr. Finley's Casebook as normal.
The BBC's correspondent in Washington, Leonard Parkin, is calling into the newsroom at Broadcasting House.
Hello, Leonard.
Hello, yes?
Yes, okay, you can go ahead then.
Right-ho. Well, as long as you realise all I've got in front of me is a pile of tape, which I'm just ripping off the printer, which you can probably hear in the background now, with a phone ringing as well, but I'll go ahead now. Hello, London, this is Leonard Parkin, calling Radio Newsreel from Washington. President Kennedy and Governor John Colony of Texas were shot today from an ambush as President Kennedy's motorcade left the center of Dallas, where the president was on a speaking tour. Mrs. Kennedy, first reports say, jumped up and grabbed her husband and cried, "Oh no," and the motorcade sped on. From then, all was confusion.
2 minutes past 1, Dallas time, and the Dallas Police Department dispatcher Gerald Hensley has Howard Brennan's description of the gunman in his hands. He broadcast it over the police radio.
Attention all squad. Attention all squad. The suspect in the shooting at Elm in Houston is reported to be an unknown white male, approximately 30, slender build, height 5 feet 10 inches, weight 165 pounds, reported to be armed with what is thought to be a .30 caliber rifle.
At Parkland Hospital, Agent Rufus Youngblood is trying to persuade Lyndon Johnson to fly to Washington. But Johnson wants to wait for news of the president.
Agents Clint Hill and Roy Kellerman are talking to Jerry Benn, head of the Secret Service detail in the White House, when Robert Kennedy comes on the line. His voice sounds so similar to the president's that Clint Hill has to hold onto a wall for support.
How bad is it?
It's as bad as it can get.
Kennedy asks Hill how Jackie is coping and then tells him to find a priest for his brother.
In downtown Dallas, William Whaley is in his cab heading to North Beckley. Next to him is Lee Harvey Oswald. Whaley comments on all the police cars, wondering what's going on. Oswald looks at him but says nothing. Whaley thinks,
here's a guy who wants to be alone.
Marina Oswald is hanging out washing in the backyard. Ruth Payne comes out to tell her that the president was shot from the book depository. She's excited at the thought that Lee might have seen something, but Marina is horrified by the news and heads to the garage, where she knows Lee has hidden a rifle since March.
Marina sighs with relief. She can see on the floor the green and brown wool blanket that Lee wraps the rifle in, tied up with string and looking as it did when she had last seen it 3 weeks ago.
Let's bring back in Professor Tony Badger and ask again about Lee Harvey Oswald, this enigma. But he tried to kill someone before, hadn't he?
Yes, in April '63 he tried to assassinate General Edwin Walker, who was a passionate right-wing Kennedy hater and ardent segregationist.
So he tries to assassinate a right-wing guy from the army, and then somebody he doesn't like because he's too far on the left, i.e. the president. Doesn't make any sense, does it?
No, but he just thinks Kennedy is wrong on Cuba.
And that was a clue that he would stop at nothing?
Yes. Yeah.
He didn't get caught?
He didn't get caught. Marina knew that he did it, and they talked about it, and they agreed not to talk about it again.
OK. Was the same rifle used for that?
Yes.
It was?
Yeah.
Tony, thanks. So, it's now past 1 o'clock in Dallas, 6 minutes past 7 here in the UK. BBC Radio 2, you're listening to the assassination of JFK minute by minute, live from the BBC studios in Maida Vale.
Back in Dallas, Dealey Plaza is still full of reporters. Darwin Payne from the Dallas Herald is one of many to find eyewitness accounts to the murder. Darwin's questions lead him to the office of the most famous witness in the Kennedy assassination of all, Abraham Zapruder.
His camera was just on top of a filing cabinet there. He had a television set going on, so we were watching Walter Cronkite. Mr. Zapruder was very distraught. He loved Kennedy and was in tears much of the time. And as Cronkite was saying on television that the president had been wounded, perhaps seriously wounded, Zapruder told him, no, he's dead. I know he is. I was watching through the viewfinder on my camera, and I saw his head explode like a firecracker. And so that removed any doubt in my own mind about his condition.
In Washington, Ted Kennedy is on the dais at the Senate presiding over a debate on federal library services. A press officer is running up to him.
Your brother, the president, has been shot.
Kennedy grabs his papers and heads out of the building.
Jackie Kennedy is walking into the trauma room at Parkland Hospital. It goes quiet. The doctors suddenly more conscious of what they're doing. A nurse had tried to stop Jackie coming through, feeling it would be better for her not to see the graphic medical procedures.
No! I want to be there when he dies.
Jackie walks round her husband's body, hands clasped in front of her. She touches Dr. Ron Jones with her elbow and hands him some brain tissue. He hands it to a nurse.
Cab driver William Whaley is dropping Oswald off a short distance from his lodgings. Oswald says nothing as he pays for the 95-cent ride.
24-year-old Englishman John Ravenscroft, later known as the DJ John Peel, is reading in the toilets of the Republic National Life Insurance Company where he works in downtown Dallas. The PA system suddenly comes on and announces the president has been shot.
Ravenscroft is shocked to hear his colleagues break into applause when they hear the news. He'd met Kennedy 3 years before when he came to the city as a presidential candidate. They chatted about why an Englishman would be working in Dallas, and Kennedy then posed for a photo. Bonnie Greer is still with us. Bonnie, teenager at the time, did you know people in Chicago? You mentioned Chicago as an Irish town. It was a Kennedy town. Did you know people that were glad that he was killed?
Dermot, you know, I grew up a black child in a black neighborhood. My daddy was from Mississippi. I didn't know anybody who didn't love JFK.
And as you got older,
No. I mean, you read about it, but those people wouldn't have known me, and I wouldn't have known them.
Okay, so it's very much a sudden thing.
No, it was very much not a thing that would have been in my circles. You know, you're usually looking at, say, for instance, Southerners and maybe people from the East Coast, but there wouldn't have been anybody who was black who would have hated him.
Thank you. At the White House, 2-year-old John Kennedy Jr. is playing with his English nanny, Maud Shaw.
Meanwhile, Secret Service agent Tom Wells of the so-called Kiddie Detail is driving 5-year-old Caroline Kennedy back to the White House. A sleepover at her friend Agatha's house is off, like other agents. Wells fears that America might be in the middle of a coup and wants to get Caroline to a secure location as quickly as possible.
Suddenly he's aware that a driver alongside him in a green sedan has recognised Caroline, the most photographed child in America. And so Wells speeds off. The man who probably suspects that Wells, in an unmarked car, is kidnapping the president's daughter in the aftermath of the shooting, gives chase. As they race through the Washington streets, the sedan is only a few feet away from Wells' rear bumper. 5 minutes from the White House, Wells finally loses him.
1:10 Dallas time. And outside Parkland Hospital, groups of people are on their knees praying. Bert Shipp of Channel 8 News spots a policeman he knows, Sheriff Bill Decker.
I asked him, how does he look? And he pointed at me and said, ever see a deer shot in the back of the head? And I said, yeah, and he just pointed his finger at me and said, that's it.
Bert then took his film camera and got some shots of the limousine. Jackie's bouquet of flowers was still there.
The roses were there in the back seat, and I thought about picking up one, but I thought, no, better not. It was a sad sight. We didn't have the words to describe it because there was blood there, and there was a pink bonnet.
Lee Harvey Oswald is leaving his boarding house with a light grey jacket to cover the snub-nosed .38 Smith & Wesson tucked into the weight of his trousers. The housekeeper for the building, Aileen Roberts, recalled the reclusive tenant a few weeks earlier.
He's tended to his own business here in this house. He'd go to work and then come back and go to his room, maybe make him a sandwich and back in his room. He just wouldn't talk. He just wouldn't talk. He just didn't talk to nobody. And we just thought he didn't like people.
At Parkland, Dr. Kemp Clark, the hospital's chief neurosurgeon, is examining Kennedy's head wound, the first time anyone has done so since he arrived. He spoke to the BBC a few weeks later that year.
There was a large wound in the right back of his head. He had no signs of a survivable injury. At this time, during the examination, the president's heart stopped. External cardiac massage was begun.
Clark can see instantly that their fight to save the president is over. A sheet is pulled up over his body. Dr. Charles Baxter, the chief of the emergency room, says,
Mrs. Kennedy, your husband is dead. We will not pronounce him dead until he's had the last rites.
The medical team starts to remove the tubes and monitoring equipment and to back away from the body. They then leave the room. Jackie kisses her husband's foot, stomach and lips. She starts to cry. Dr. Baxter would say later,
There were probably more tears shed in that room than in the surrounding 100 miles.
While we're in this moment in Dallas, here in the UK, we're joined by singer-songwriter Duke Special with a song of love and loss from his album Songs from the Deep Forest. And this is called This Could Be My Last Day.
To feel the fall and know that I'm alive. I see my breath and think of God and everything I had. This could be my last day. This could be my last day. Touch your grave, it comforts me and tells me to be true. Everyone's a burning fire and time keeps running through. This could be my last day. This could be my last day. I'm going under. 11 years and it's September, will never be the same. Charing Cross and woven hats and flinching at your name. This could be my last day. This could be my last day. Everything is fragile. Everything is broken. You were full of living color. Such a sense of wonder. Prophecy is written. Prophecy is spoken. Oh, I wish I could have saved you, but I saw you going under. I wish I could have saved you, but it feels like I'm going under. This could be my last day. 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 be my last day.
Duke, special thank you for coming in and playing live to us. It's BBC Radio 2. You're listening to the assassination of JFK, minute by minute. The president at this point in the day in Dallas has been shot dead. And we are getting a reaction on Twitter from people, Louise, who remember it very well.
Yes, they remember it vividly. This is Pat Mock. I was 8 years old in church for Friday retreat. I remember the priest announcing the news from the pulpit. I always remember that eerie silence followed by gasps and tears from the whole church. Denise says, I was 4 years old. My mother was ironing. She stopped and started to cry and sobbed. The president's been shot, she said, my first memory.
It's incredible what people can remember from such a young age, isn't it? Rosie Wakefield, I remember being very shocked and frightened. Also remember all the radio stations playing sombre music. By the way, the performances so far have been breathtaking. Thank you, Rosie. And Jane Mannerings, I was 7 years old and remember the news flash coming through on the TV and my whole family being in shock at the scene. Today I will never forget. Please do keep them coming in at BBC Radio 2, hashtag R2JFK. And
all our singers coming in live to play for us on Radio 2. So let us go back then to the scene in Dallas, and the Secret Service agent Clint Hill, who remember was on the back of the limousine, is now on the phone to O'Neill's funeral home.
We've got merchandise at all prices.
Bring the best one you have, Mr. O'Neill. Do you have any questions?
O'Neill goes to select his most expensive casket, but knows he's going to have to wait till the staff come back from their lunch break before he can get the $4,000 solid bronze Britannia model into the hearse. It's that heavy.
Hospital administrator Steve Landrigan gives Clint Hill his own jacket to cover up the agent's bloody shirt. Kennedy aide Dave Powers looks down and notices for the first time the blood on his suit, but he doesn't care. It's a cheap one. As he often says to his wife, when you travel with the president, no one notices what you wear.
In Los Angeles, freeways have ground to a halt as the drivers, having heard the news of the shooting on their car radios, pull over to take it in.
Nightclub owner Jack Ruby stumbles out of the Dallas Morning News offices and sits in his car sobbing. He decides to close his clubs out of respect for the president.
Now, Father Oscar Huber of Holy Trinity Catholic Church has arrived. He'd received a call from the Parkland Hospital administrator and rushed straight over. Jackie watches as he pulls back the sheet that hides her husband's face.
Si capax ego te absolvo a peccatis tuis in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. If it is possible, I absolve you from your sins in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
He then presses his thumb in holy oil and anoints Kennedy's forehead with a sign of the cross. An hour ago, he'd been cheering the president from the pavement.
Bob Huffaker of local radio station KRLD News is broadcasting live outside the hospital.
It was a matter of trying to reassure our listeners that we were there and that we would remain there. It was a time when suddenly we realized that it was up to us to sort of hold people together in this tragedy.
Jackie is talking to Father Huber.
Thank you for taking care of the president. Please pray for him.
As he's about to leave the hospital, an agent says to the priest firmly,
Father, you don't know anything about this.
He nods in agreement.
John Peel is on Elm Street watching policemen search Dealey Plaza. He left work as soon as he heard the news of the shooting, and at a roadblock a sobbing policeman had stopped him. But after Peel pretended to be from the Liverpool Echo, he'd allowed him through. Later that day, Peel will black his way into a police press conference and be just a few feet from Oswald.
Deputy Sheriff Luke Milley is on the 6th floor of the book depository, squeezed between tall stacks of boxes. On the floor, he spots 3 spent cartridge casings. He then notices a slight crease in one of the boxes. Looks like the perfect place to steady a rifle. Mooney leans out of the 6th floor window and shouts to his colleagues.
Father Huber, who had administered the last rites, doesn't do what the Secret Service asked him to.
Just a moment. We have a bulletin coming in. We now switch you directly to Parkland Hospital and KBOX News Director Bill Hampton.
The President of the United States is dead. I have just talked to Father Oscar Hubert of the Holy Trinity Catholic Church. He and another priest tell me that the pair of men have just administered the last rites of the Catholic Church to President Kennedy. I asked the father, is Mr. Kennedy dead? And his quote, he's dead all right.
BBC Radio 2, 23 minutes past 1 in Dallas. Police patrolman J.D. Tippit is driving along 10th Street in Dallas in his 1963 Ford Cruiser. He's an experienced cop who 6 years earlier had been stabbed by a man with an ice pick. The encounter gave him a limp and a more cautious approach to policing, which his wife Marie has welcomed.
Tippit can see a man walking briskly ahead of him who matches the description of the assassin that's just come over the radio. He pulls his patrol car over to the side of the road and calls to the man.
Hey! Excuse me! Sir!
Oswald stops and leans on the car. They speak through the vent in the window. Something in their exchange makes Tippit suspicious, and he gets out. As he reaches the front of the car, Oswald pulls out his revolver and shoots him in the head and the stomach. Officer Tippit's cab rolls out into the street.
Just half a block away, waitress Helen Markham, waiting for a bus to take her to work downtown, is watching, horrified. Oswald is walking towards her, playing with his gun.
He didn't run. It just didn't scare him to death. He didn't run. When he saw me, he looked at me, stared at me. I put my hands over my face like this. I closed my eyes. Gradually, I opened my fingers like this, and I opened my eyes. And when I did, he started off in this kind of little trot.
Taxi driver William Scoggins has also seen Tippit being shot. He's now hiding behind his car. He thinks he might be next. As Oswald passes, he hears him mutter,
"Poor dumb cop, poor dumb cop."
A small crowd has gathered around the policeman who's lying dead on the ground, his gun still in his hand. Mechanic Domingo Benavides is in Tippit's squad car using the police radio to tell them there's been a shooting. This recording of the radio picks up the chaotic scene as the dispatcher desperately calls out Officer Tippit's call sign, 78.
Hello, police operator. We've got a shooting out here. What location? Between Los Angeles and Berkeley. It's a police officer. Somebody shot him. 78. 78.
In Dealey Plaza, reporter Hugh Ainsworth is standing next to a policeman and he hears the exchange.
It was probably the best judgment that I made that day. I thought someone shoots at the president here and someone shoots a cop 3 or 4 miles away. It's got to be connected in some way. I find a couple of TV newsmen that have a mobile unit. And I said, "Did you hear what I heard?" And they said no, and I had told them an officer had been shot. And they said, "Hop in, let's go." And we broke every speed limit and almost hit several people and finally got over to the scene where Officer Tippit had been shot.
Waitress Helen Markham described to Hugh Ainsworth what she'd witnessed.
I was screaming for someone to help me. I kept saying, "Somebody has killed a policeman. He's killed him. Killed him. Oh, God, help us."
In Parkland, hospital technician Daryl Tomlinson can see a trolley blocking a corridor, and so he pushes it back towards the wall. It's the trolley that was used to move Governor Connolly to an operating theatre a short time before. As it hits the wall, Tomlinson hears a clink and spots a bullet lying against the metal rim. He calls over O.P. Wright, a personnel officer at the hospital. Wright can't find an FBI agent to give the bullet to, so he puts it in his pocket. Now let me bring you in here, Professor Tony Badger, because this is where conspiracy theorists have a field day. What was that bullet doing there?
Well, we don't really know, but the important thing about it is that it highlights all those procedural weaknesses in the original investigation of the shooting, and they are all followed up by the official investigation of the Warren Commission, which had a vested interest in coming to a particular conclusion.
And there are so many different conspiracy theories, aren't there, including, the gunman on the grassy knoll?
Yes, that there's a second shooter, and then all sorts of conspiracies about whether there were extra shots fired at the president.
Tony, do you buy any theories, having studied this?
No. Oswald was the lone shooter. We're not quite so certain about why he did it and who was behind him, but almost certainly he did it on his own. He was the lone shooter, and the weaknesses of the Warren Commission are as nothing compared to the weaknesses of the alternative conspiracies.
Tony Badger. We're joined now live in the studio by John Bramwell and Pete Jobson from I Am Clute. Together with our orchestra, they're going to perform a song of theirs that, again, is a song that takes on a new, darker meaning in this context. It's called The Same Deep Water.
Swim out to the ocean, drown your thoughts out at sea, drench your soul in the water, the same deep water as me. You've been watching for cloudburst, you've been praying for rain, drench your soul in the water, cleanse your heart of the stain, cleanse your heart of the stain.
I am Clute, the same deep water. BBC Radio 2, you're listening to the assassination of JFK minute by minute.
Let's go back to Dallas. The new president and his Secret Service detail are rushing from the back of Parkland towards a police car which is waiting outside to take them to Air Force One at Love Field. No one knows if the killing of President Kennedy is part of a wider conspiracy, and they aren't taking any chances. Agent Rufus Youngblood says to Lyndon Johnson,
"I'm going to stick to you like glue."
The flag outside the hospital is already at half-mast.
The English nurse, Diana Bowen, realises she has the president's gold wristwatch in her pocket. She runs out to Trauma 1 to find Jack Price, the hospital administrator. He gives it to a Secret Service agent.
Darwin Payne has failed to persuade Abraham Zapruder to let his paper buy his film. He's watching helpless as the Dallas FBI leaves Zapruder's office with the camera and the film.
And I understand he gave the money that he made from that film to Officer J.D. Tippit's family and to his wife. Zapruder did not bask in the limelight after that. He was a quiet individual who didn't try to capitalize on it at all.
In Dallas, 1:34 is the time. Agent Roy Kellerman is in the nurses' station on the line to the White House. A man walks in and says to him,
"I am the Dallas County Medical Examiner, Earl Rose. There's been a homicide here. You won't be able to remove the body. We will have to take it down there to the mortuary and have an autopsy."
"No, you're not."
"Well, we have a law here whereby you have to comply with it."
An autopsy means that Mrs. Kennedy would have to remain in Dallas for at least another 24 hours. And for the Kennedy party, that's intolerable. Admiral Berkeley, JFK's personal physician, loses his temper.
"We are removing the body. This is the President of the United States, and there should be some consideration in an event like this."
Agent Roy Kellerman remains cool and says to Earl Rose,
"You are going to have to come up with someone a little stronger than you to give me the law that this body can't be removed."
Rose rushes for a phone. He fully intends to find someone who will make these men realize that Texas law is on his side.
The Secret Service detail at the White House are drawing lots to decide who tells Maud Shaw, the Kennedys' English nanny, that the president has died. Agent Bob Foster loses. She will tell Caroline later that day at bedtime, after Caroline asks her why she's been crying. Some years later, Maud wrote simply,
"It was a dreadful time for us both. I wept for the death of this good, kindly, able man and for his wife, and these two little mites I'd known almost from the moment they were born."
On stage at London's Old Vic, before the start of a production of Uncle Vanya, Laurence Olivier is asking the audience to join him in singing The Star-Spangled Banner. 3 years earlier, Olivier had performed at JFK's inaugural gala in Washington.
Parkland Hospital's nurses' classroom has been converted into a makeshift press room. White House press officer Matt Kilduff is in front of the blackboard, trying to summon up the courage to speak. He's pale, and the reporters can see that he's trying not to cry, but his cheeks are already covered in tears.
Oswald's rifle was found 15 minutes ago, hidden between some boxes. An initial dusting by Lieutenant Carl Day of the Crime Search Unit failed to find any fingerprints, so he plans to take it back to his lab for more careful analysis. Day holds the gun, whilst Captain Will Fritz pulls the bolt back. A live round falls to the floor.
At Parkland, Press Secretary Mac Kilduff has found the words.
President John F. Kennedy. President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock, Central Standard Time, today here in Dallas. He died of gunshot wounds in the brain. Mrs. Kennedy was not hit. The Vice President was not hit.
One journalist starts to ask if Johnson has been sworn in as president, but breaks down.
Others rush to phones to call their papers and radio and TV networks. NBC reporter Robert McNeil dictates down the phone live to the studio. The presenter repeats what he hears.
White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago, after being shot by an unknown assailant during a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
Kilduff had been fired by Kenny O'Donnell just a few days before they left Washington. He told Kilduff he'd have to take up a position elsewhere, as they had to lose a member of the press team. When Kilduff mentioned that to JFK he was having to leave, the president said,
"Forget it. I'll take care of it when we get back from Texas."
Now Mac had lost his champion.
Ruth Payne and Marina Oswald are sitting on the sofa weeping at the news that the president is dead.
What a terrible thing for Mrs. Kennedy and for the children to be left without a father.
Ruth spoke about her friendship with Marina a few months later.
I respected what I saw in her, her pride, her wish to be independent, her habit of hard work and expecting to work, her devotion to her children. I also respected her willingness and effort to get on with Lee and to try to make the best of what apparently was not a particularly good marriage, but yet she had made that commitment and she expected to do her best for it.
In Britain, the news of the assassination is coming a little later. Leonard Parkin is giving an update from Washington.
But so far as we know at this moment, President Kennedy is still alive, although in critical condition. And from me in Washington, back now to London.
And all we can add in London to Leonard Parkin's news from Washington is that the Voice of America transmitters are reporting the fact that the president has in fact died. As soon as we have further news for you, we'll bring it. And that ends Radio Newsreel for this evening.
This is BBC Radio 2. You're listening to the assassination of JFK minute by minute, exactly 50 years on. We're live from the BBC's Maida Vale studios in London. And on Twitter, Louise?
Yes, we should say thank you to all our musicians here. Lots of you are appreciating them and all their work. They are live here in the studio with us. Thank you, all of you. Jamie Hetherington says, the music tonight has been amazing. Loved the version of Golden Slumbers by Liza Doolittle and a beautiful rendition by Duke Special as well. Thank you for those.
20-2 Dallas time.
Undertaker Vernon O'Neill has arrived at the hospital with a casket in one of his white hearses. He believes that death doesn't have to be depressing. Clint Hill is signing for him.
Dallas Morning News nightclub reporter Tony Zoppi has arrived late at Parkland and has been unable to get past the police cordon as he's forgotten his press pass. He's watching O'Neill's men and Secret Service agents struggle with a heavy casket. One of O'Neill's men suddenly calls to him.
"Grab a corner, will you?"
So Zoppi helps carry the casket. As they get close to the hospital doors, he starts to move away, but the agents tell him to keep pushing. Almost without thinking, Zoppi reaches under the casket and pushes his hand hard against it to make some fingerprints. He reckons the president will soon be inside the casket, and he wants him to know that he helped carry it in, if nothing else. But Zoppi will never be able to fully explain why he did it. Following a yellow line on the floor, Zoppi helps carry the casket to the trauma room door, where a Secret Service agent says,
"Thank you, we'll take it from here, gentlemen."
Oh, no, we got it.
No, we'll take it from here.
Zoppi doesn't push his luck.
Now the casket has arrived, the Secret Service ask ambulance driver Aubrey Wright to come into the emergency room to remove the president's body. He recalled what happened a few months later.
We went in there, emotions of all of us was so high that we really couldn't speak to each other. Everyone was really choking back tears. We just stared at each other until Mrs. Kennedy walked into the room. She walked in struggling more or less with her finger to get a ring off her finger. She took the ring off and lifted the sheet on the president. After she lifted the sheet, she lifted his left hand and placed the ring on his finger. She bent down and kissed the president's hand. She then backed away, never turning her back on the president, and backed out of the door. We picked the president up and placed him into the casket.
Meanwhile, Boston's Symphony Hall is packed with an audience waiting for the regular Friday afternoon concert by its famous symphony orchestra. The concert is going out live on the radio. The conductor Eric Leinsdorf walks up to a microphone. This is an extraordinary piece of archive.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a press report over the wires. We hope that it is unconfirmed, but we have to doubt it, that the President of the United States has been the victim of an assassination. We will play the funeral march from Beethoven's Third Symphony.
And so now, here, live in our studio, the orchestra playing their interpretation of a section of that piece.
Years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free. In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it.
The voice of JFK himself. This is BBC Radio 2, and it is the assassination of JFK, minute by minute. A transistor radio is on in Hardy's shoe store, Oak Cliff, Dallas. For the past hour, the manager, Johnny Brewer, has been listening to news reports about the assassination. A moment ago, they announced that a policeman had just been shot up the road.
A man is walking into the entrance of the store as a police car passes. Brewer thinks it's strange that the man doesn't turn to see what's going on. You can see that he looks scared and out of breath.
He was a little man, about 5'9", weighed about 150 pounds is all. He had brown hair, he had a brown sports shirt on, shirt tail was out. He just looked funny to me. Well, in the first place, I'd seen him someplace before. I think he'd been in my store before. His hair was sort of messed up and looked like he'd been running, and he looked scared, and he looked funny.
The man waits for a moment, looks at Brewer and heads off down the street. Suspicious, Brewer quickly follows him and sees the man dart into the Texas Theatre, a cinema showing a double bill of Cry of Battle and War is Hell. Julia Postal is selling tickets.
I stepped out of the box office, and as I turned around, Johnny Brewer was standing there, and he asked me if the fella that ducked in bought a ticket. And I said, no, by golly, he didn't. And I said, go in and see if you can see him. It isn't too much people in there.
At Parkland, Tony Zoppi has one of the few phones that haven't been tied up by the FBI or Secret Service, and he's calling the Dallas Morning News office. He found a girl on a switchboard who let him use a phone as she reads his column every day. City editor Johnny King answers.
Johnny, this is Tony Zoppi. The president's dead.
How the hell do you know?
I just carried his casket.
You better be right.
I'm right.
Johnny Brewer and an usher at the Texas Theatre are checking the lock bars of the exit doors. They're all down, so they know the man that Brewer is following is still in the building. They look into the auditorium, but it's too dark to see who's there. they hear a seat pop up. In the box office, cashier Julia Postal has called the police, and now she's phoning the projectionist to check if he can see anything.
On US television, all adverts have been suspended until the president's funeral, and for the first time ever, the 3 networks have cancelled their regular programmes and are broadcasting only live news.
Lyndon Johnson has reached Love Field. He and Agent Youngblood are running up the steps of Air Force One. Youngblood shouts for the blinds to be pulled down. He's worried about a possible sniper on the roof of the terminal building. The plane is hot and stuffy as the pilot, preparing for a swift departure, has disconnected it from the air conditioning truck.
Policemen are now filling the Texas theatre, many of them brandishing guns. Some stay outside to control a crowd that's growing by the minute. Shoe store manager Johnny Brewer is standing by an exit, peering round a curtain.
They turned the house lights on, and I looked out from the curtains and saw the man. He was in the center section about 6 or 7 rows from the back.
Reporter Hugh Ainsworth, always where the action is up in the balcony looking down.
The movie was still showing. There were very few people in the theater. It was sort of surreal because the lighting was strange, and there were officers coming off the stage. A couple of them uniformed, a couple of them not.
Meanwhile, at Parkland, Secret Service agent Clint Hill is on the phone to Bob Foster, the lead agent on the so-called kiddie detail. As they talk, Hill is thinking of the president's last words when he said goodbye to John Jr. John Jr. had been crying because he wanted to fly with his parents.
Take care of John for me, won't you, Mr. Foster?
Foster told Hill he thought the president's request was strange. He'd never made that remark before. Foster then distracted John with stories until his father's helicopter was out of sight.
Johnny Brewer is on the stage of the Texas Theatre, pointing out to 4 policemen the man he'd seen in his store. They leave the stage, pretending to be interested in 2 men across the aisle from the man. Officer Nick MacDonald asks them to stand and then searches them for weapons. He glances over his shoulder and can see the suspect sitting, watching him.
Hugh Ainsworth is only 15 feet away.
He kept his eye on Oswald, though, because Johnny Brewer, from the back of the stage, had showed him the man that was acting suspiciously. So Nick MacDonald, the cop, moved up to Oswald very slowly, very carefully.
I walked out of this row up to the right center aisle towards the suspect, and as I walked up there just at a normal gait, I didn't look directly at him, but I kept my eye on him, and just I got to the row where the suspect was sitting, I stopped abruptly and turned in and told him to get on his feet. He rose immediately, bringing up both hands. Then he said,
"Well, it's all over now."
But it wasn't all over, because then he pulled a pistol out and tried to shoot MacDonald.
John! John, get in here! Help! Get down! It's on! All right,
MacDonald has grabbed the gun, and the skin between his thumb and forefinger is caught between the hammer and the primer as Oswald tries to pull the trigger.
7 other cops are now joining in the struggle for the gun, including some who only 20 minutes before had been searching for the assassin in the book depository. Oswald is hit from behind with the butt of a shotgun and handcuffed.
Don't hit me anymore. I am not resisting arrest. I know my rights. I want a lawyer.
The film War is Hell is still flickering on the screen.
Parkland personnel officer O.P. Wright is giving the bullet found on the trolley to Secret Service agent Dick Johnson. Johnson looks at it and sees instantly it's been fired from a gun, but he has to get Mrs. Kennedy and the president's casket to Love Field as soon as possible, so he wraps the bullet in a handkerchief and puts it in his pocket.
This is the assassination of JFK minute by minute on Radio 2. On Air Force One, Lyndon Johnson is discussing with his aides whether or not he should be sworn in as president before they take off. Fearing a conspiracy and that the Russians might take advantage of the situation, he decides he must take the oath immediately in Dallas.
There's a crowd of several hundred people now outside the Texas Theatre. There are rumours that the president's killer has been captured. Police officer Jerry Hill is part of the squad who made the arrest. He spoke to the press a few hours later.
There were some 600 to 800 people outside yelling, "Kill him," and this, that, and the other, and some more officers had to be pressed into service right quick that didn't actually have their hands on him to force the crowd back so we could get him in the car without anybody touching him.
Let us have him!
I protest this police brutality!
An old woman swats Oswald with her umbrella.
Walking back to his store, Johnny Brewer remembers where he'd seen the man before. He'd spent ages deciding whether to buy a pair of cheap crepe-soled shoes. Brewer starts to sprint. He realises he's left the store open. A lot's happened in the 12 minutes since he left it.
12 minutes, not long, and we need to take a breather. Bonnie, I can see this is overwhelming for you.
Oh, well, you know, that little 15-year-old, she's still alive and well, you know. And when it was announced in Boston at the concert, and you hear the people and their reaction, that's how everybody in the country was.
That
that's
gasp,
exactly, yeah. It's just so it just hit that part that's still very much alive.
And for me, it's a sort of sense of chaos as well that's going on around everybody, and Jackie Kennedy sort of at the centre of it, really.
Well, you know, you have to remember, America is very much a country about protection, and Americans are very, very serious about that. And so suddenly the skies opened up, and we don't know what's coming at us.
And of course what happens now is that we go to Parkland Hospital and hundreds of people are starting to arrive. They've heard the president has died. That's where they go. Reporter Bob Huffaker remembers the scene.
The parking lot was still cordoned off, but average citizens of Dallas began to converge on Parkland Hospital. Some of these were leading their children by the hand to stand vigil there in the parking lot. And it was not an easy scene to report. It was one of the saddest, well, I think maybe the saddest scene that I've ever seen, much less had to describe.
Now, obviously many hits from 1963 took on an extra poignancy after the assassination of JFK. One of them was a song sung by Skeeter Davis, which had been #1 earlier that year. So here are the Magic Numbers with their version of The End of the World.
Why does the sun go on shining? Why does the sea rush to shore? Don't they know it's the end of the world? 'Cause you don't love me anymore. Why do the birds go on singing? Why do the
from 1963, and here in the studio with us with the magic numbers, the end of the world. You're listening to the assassination of JFK minute by minute.
From the bedroom of Air Force One, where he's lying on the bed, Lyndon Johnson is calling the Attorney General Robert Kennedy. After expressing his condolences, Johnson asks him if he has any objections to him being sworn in right away and who should do it. Stunned, Kennedy says that he'll get back to him with an answer. Let's talk about that a bit with Tony Badger. What kind of history have these two men got?
They both hate each other, and they're both very good haters. Johnson thought that Bobby Kennedy was a spoilt, snotty brat, and Kennedy thought that Johnson was a lying, boorish, ignorant oaf.
It's a very difficult situation that they're right now.
Inside Parkland, Jackie Kennedy is smoking a cigarette as she waits for her husband's body to be removed from hospital. She asks Sergeant Duggar what's causing the delay. He pretends not to know, but has a hunch that Earl Rose, the medical examiner, is trying to stop the president's body leaving the building.
Sergeant Duggar is right. About 20 people are crowded around the emergency room doors, and a heated argument's going on between Special Agent Roy Kellerman and Earl Rose, who insists, correctly, that Texas law requires an autopsy before a body can be moved. To back him up, Rose has with him Theron Ward, a young justice of the peace. Agent Kellerman says,
Judge Ward, do you know who I am? There must be something in your thinking here that we don't have to go through this agony, so the family doesn't have to go through this. We will take care of the matter when we get back to Washington.
I know who you are. I can't help you out.
JFK aide Kenny O'Donnell tries...
Judge Ward, can't you make an exception for President Kennedy?
It's just another homicide case as far as I'm concerned.
Reporter Darwin Payne has left Abraham Zapruder's office disappointed, but began to cheer up when he was one of only a handful of reporters allowed into the book depository by the police.
We went up to the 6th floor and saw the barricade that Oswald had made, and were able to peer through the window and see exactly the view that he had. And we were shown where the rifle had been found. And it was a pretty clear view, I thought, looking down to the street where he would have fired his shots.
Well, listening to that clip from Mr. Payne, Professor Badger, makes me think the press are trampling over a crime scene here.
Well, you have to remember that Southern police departments at that time were about as old-fashioned and as unprofessional as you could get. And they were also extraordinarily pleased with themselves, so they were always going to give the press very good access.
But the access they got throughout the whole thing, when you see the clips and you see the archive, it's extraordinary just how much they got, really, considering, you compare it to today.
Well, it's terribly easy to get into a Southern police station, and some would say even easier to get out.
Tony, thank you. BBC Radio 2.
Past 2 in Dallas. Oswald is sitting between two police officers in the back of a squad car.
I know my rights. What is this all about?
They tell him about the shooting of J.D. Tippit.
Police officer been killed? I hear they burned for murder.
You may find out.
Well, they say it just takes a second to die.
The policemen are struck by just how unemotional and unconcerned the man is.
At Parkland, Kennedy aide Kenny O'Donnell has had enough of arguing with the Texans.
We don't give a damn what these laws say. We're not staying here 3 hours or 3 minutes. Get out of the way. We're leaving.
Secret Service agents push the casket past a furious Rose. A crucifix placed on top almost falls off. Jackie follows, a hand still in a blood-stained glove resting on the casket. Jack Price, the administrator for the hospital, instinctively reaches out and touches the casket as it passes, as a final salute.
Outside, Clint Hill tells Jackie that they can ride in the car behind the hearse.
No, Mr. Hill. I'm riding with the President.
Shy Sergeant Duggar, still enraged and embarrassed by Earl Rose's behaviour, opens the door of the hearse for Jackie.
Thank you.
he finally finds his voice.
Bob Duggar, ma'am.
"29-year-old Robert Oswald is at work in the marketing department of the Acme Brick Company in Denton, Texas. He's hurrying to his desk when he hears someone say Oswald. He stops, thinking someone is calling him, but then realizes it's come from a transistor radio on the receptionist's desk. The receptionist is crying. Then the radio bulletin mentions the name in full.
That's my kid brother.
A salesman leaning on a wall nearby says,
Let's not hope this is true.
Meanwhile, in the police car heading to the Dallas Police Department, Detective Paul Bentley pulls a brown leather wallet from Lee Harvey Oswald's left hip pocket. He finds a Dallas Public Library card with a name on it.
Lee Oswald.
Oswald says nothing. Bentley sees another name in the wallet.
Alex J. Hiddell.
Again, nothing.
I guess we are gonna have to wait until we get to the station to find out who he actually is.
A phone is ringing at the news desk of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Crime reporter Bob Schieffer answers it.
Is there anyone there who could give me a lift to Dallas?
Madam, this is a newspaper, not a taxi service. Don't you know that the president's been shot?
Yes, I heard it on the radio. I think the person they've arrested is my son.
Schieffer's jaw drops. He has a scoop, and Marguerite Oswald has her lift into town. 56-year-old Marguerite has lived a turbulent, unsettled life, married 3 times and with 3 sons, John, Robert, and Lee. The first 2 fled their controlling and money-obsessed mother as soon as they could. Marguerite spoilt Lee, tolerating his truancy from school and his violent temper. But in the end, he too left her.
Reporter Hugh Ainsworth met Marguerite many times.
Oswald's mother was a strange woman who was always complaining and always whining and always trying to make a buck here and there. I guess she needed it. She had 2 or 3 husbands, and she and I, of course, didn't get along very well because every time I wrote a story about it, she would call me at the Dallas News or Dallas Times-Herald, and she'd tell me what was wrong, and she'd semi-threaten me, you know. And one time she threatened me, I thought. She said, well, your kids will suffer, and she hung up.
For the rest of her life, Marguerite was convinced that Lee was innocent. She believed that Lee had been employed by the CIA to assassinate President Kennedy as a mercy killing because he was terminally ill. For reasons best known to herself, Marguerite had a plaque made for her house.
My son, Lee Harvey Oswald, even after his death, has done more for his country than any other living human being.
So it's gone 2 in Dallas, 7 minutes past to be precise, and Robert Oswald, Lee's brother, is calling his wife Vada, suggesting she go with their 2 children to her parents' isolated farm outside Dallas. Robert doesn't say it to Vada, but he's worried about reprisals against his family.
Through his reporting of the Kennedy assassination over the past 50 years, Hugh Ainsworth has become a friend of Robert Oswald.
Robert is a fine man. He's gone through a certain amount of hell. His kids have had a little trouble in school. Where Marina remarried and her kids could change their name, Robert Oswald's 2 kids did not have that option. And I asked him one time, what happened to Lee Harvey? I mean, you and your half-brother John Pick both went into the Marines and you became good citizens and you had families and are normal people, and then here comes Lee. And he said, Hugh, he stayed with Mother too long. He stayed with her 2 or 3 years longer after we left. That made the difference.
In Dallas, JFK's hearse is on its way to Love Field. Inside, Admiral Berkeley is fumbling for something. He produces 2 roses from the bouquet given to Jackie at Love Field.
These were under... in his shirt.
Jackie places them in the pocket of a pink suit.
Nellie Connolly is receiving some good news. Surgeon Dr. Robert Shaw, who'd been airlifted by NASA from Houston to operate on her husband, says the bullet missed major arteries. The governor has a hole in his chest the size of a baseball, but will survive. Shaw praises Nellie for holding her husband's right arm across the wound as they sped to Parkland, as it shut off the air to his chest. Nellie explains she was simply hugging her wounded spouse.
From the top of one of Love Field's air cargo buildings, news cameraman Jimmy G. Darnell is filming the president's casket being loaded on board Air Force One. He then climbs down the ladder on the outside of the building and comes face to face with the Dallas policeman.
Let me have that. That's sacrilegious.
Darnell hands the film over and never sees it again.
President Kennedy had loved flying on Air Force One. He'd helped with its design, and when he saw the finished $9 million jet for the first time, he joked,
"It's magnificent. I'll take it."
Now there's no space on the plane for a casket, so 4 seats and a partition have been removed by the aircrew. At the foot of the aircraft's steps, Jackie Kennedy is watching the Secret Service agents struggle to get the heavy casket inside. It is only 3 hours since she landed at Love Field.
Clint Hill isn't surprised by the bravery that Jackie is showing. At the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, he told Jackie that in the event of a missile attack on the White House, he would take her and the family to a secure location.
I didn't even get all the way through my explanation when she stopped me. Mr. Hill, she said, if that develops, I'm going to take Caroline and John, and we're going to walk out on the South grounds and stand there like the millions of other Americans have to do and meet our fate. We're not going to let some dictator determine what we are going to do.
Kenny O'Donnell keeps looking over his shoulder, expecting the Dallas medical authorities to arrive, still insisting on an autopsy. The casket won't fit through the rear door, so they break off its handles.
At the police department, Captain Will Fritz of the Homicide Bureau is handing 2 of his officers an address in Irving, where he wants them to go and pick up a suspect named Lee Oswald. One of the officers points to a man who's just been brought in.
Captain, we can save you a trip. There the son of a bitch sits.
This is Dallas police officer Jerry Hill speaking to the press later that day.
The boy that we apprehended for shooting Officer J.D. Tippit is an employee of the book factory where the shots that killed the president were fired from. He's very arrogant. We offered him an opportunity on the way to the station. We told him that there would be photographers there, and if he wanted to hide his head, he could bend over and hide his face against his chest, or, just bend over where they couldn't get a clear view of him or anything like that. This he refused to do. He seemed very arrogant and proud of what was happening to him.
In the Parkland classroom, Dr. Malcolm Perry is being bombarded with questions by the press about what's happened to the president. He's barely finished one answer before another question is yelled at him.
The president was critically ill and moribund at the time these measures were begun.
Completely ill and what?
Moribund.
What does that mean?
Near death.
What was that word you used?
Moribund. Dr. Clark arrived thereafter immediately.
Could you tell us what resuscitative measures were attempted?
Assisted respiration.
What is that?
With what?
Assisted respiration with oxygen and an anesthesia machine, passage of an endotracheal tube.
Does that mean you stick it in?
Perry's main concern was to save the president's life and hadn't done a full examination, not even turning the body over, so didn't have the opportunity to fully examine the bullet wounds. Someone asked Perry to show where the neck wound was, and Perry points just below his Adam's apple.
It appeared to be an entrance wound.
The reporters start scribbling that there's evidence Kennedy was hit from the front by at least 1 bullet, leading to confusion and speculation that has lasted 50 years.
You're listening to Radio 2 and the assassination of JFK minute by minute. We are now joined by a great songwriter who also happens to be one of Britain's finest vocalists, Paul Carrack, to sing live for us now a brilliant Paul Simon song.
Many's the time I've been mistaken, and many times confused. Yes, and I've often felt forsaken, and certainly misused. But I'm alright, I'm alright. I'm just weary to my bones. Still, you don't expect to be bright and bon vivant, so far away from home, so far away from home. I don't know a soul who's not been battered, don't have a friend who feels at ease, don't know a dream that's not been shattered or driven to its knees. Oh, but it's alright, it's alright. We've lived so well, so long. Still, when I think of the road we're traveling on, I wonder what's gone wrong. I can't help it, I wonder what's gone wrong. And I dreamed I was dying, I dreamed that my soul rose unexpectedly, looking back down at me, smiled reassuringly, and I dreamed I was flying, and high up above, my eyes could clearly see the Statue of Liberty sailing away to sea, and I dreamed I was flying. Come on a ship they call the Mayflower, come on a ship that sailed the moon, come in the age's most uncertain hour, and sing the American tune. Oh, but it's alright, it's alright, you can't be forever blessed. Still, tomorrow's gonna be another working day, and I'm trying to get some rest. That's all, I'm trying to get some rest.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely beautiful, and so many people tweeting us saying how fantastic the music is. Thank you for being part of it.
Thank you.
Lots of other messages as well coming in on Twitter. Tammy says, I'm deeply moved by this evening. As the daughter of a Massachusetts soldier, JFK is a family hero. Those moments we will never forget.
For pictures, videos and documents for the day's events, head over to the Radio 2 homepage and follow the live commentary as well. Jeremy?
Yeah, just got a tweet from Francesca Bethel who says, who needs TV? A radio programme about JFK is engrossing and very thoughtful. A lot of people just appreciating going back over the events minute by minute as we're doing. And the time now, where are we? We're 18 minutes past 2 in Dallas. We're thinking back 50 years. Air Force One is dark and stuffy. Jackie is walking walking towards the president's bedroom. It's the last place that she and Jack had been alone together. And as she walks into the bedroom on the plane, Lyndon Johnson, who'd been dictating to his secretary, leaps off the bed and hurriedly leaves the cabin. Jackie is stunned.
Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman is feeling uneasy. He usually knows everyone on board Air Force One, but the plane is full of unfamiliar people, many from Air Force Two, the Vice President's plane. From the way he's acting, it's clear to Kellerman the ruthless Youngblood, Johnson's agent, feels that now he's in charge. Change is in the air.
General Godfrey McHugh, JFK's Air Force aide, is feeling equally unsettled. He tells press officer Matt Kilduff that they should take off immediately. Kilduff says,
"We are not flying to Washington until the president has been sworn."
I have only one president, and he's lying back in that cabin.
Kenny O'Donnell overhears and is proud of the general. He has little respect for Johnson. In the Oval Office, JFK and O'Donnell used to have a set routine to deal with Johnson's many complaints. The president would listen to the vice president's grievances and then call in O'Donnell and pretend to tell him off in front of Johnson.
Damn it, Kenny, you've gone and done it again.
O'Donnell would meekly take the blame and Johnson would go away happy.
Lady Bird knocks on Air Force One's bedroom door and asks Jackie if she needs help changing. She can see that she's still wearing her blood-stained clothing.
Oh no, perhaps later, but not right now. What if I had not been there? I'm so glad I was there.
Meanwhile, down below on the tarmac, funeral director Vernon O'Neill has arrived to collect his white hearse. Over the next 12 months, he will send Jackie Kennedy bills for the cost of the casket. The government finally pays him $3,400, less than he wanted, because they believed he deliberately exaggerated the casket's value.
Johnson's secretary on Air Force One has been patched through to Robert Kennedy at home in Virginia and to the Deputy Attorney General Nick Katzenbach in the White House. She's poised to write down the wording of the oath of office. Robert Kennedy starts reading it, but then lets Katzenbach take over.
I do solemnly swear, parenthesis, or affirm, parenthesis, that I will faithfully execute the capital letter office of the President of the United States, comma,
and will to the best of my ability, comma, preserve, comma, protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, period.
In room 317 in City Hall, Captain Fritz is starting the interrogation of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Where do you work?
Texas Book Depository.
How'd you get the job?
A lady I know recommended me for the job. I got the job through her.
Fritz likes to get acquainted with suspects at the start of an interrogation. He's soft-spoken and has a reputation as a skilled interrogator. He's been so long in the job that he was part of the squad that hunted for Bonnie and Clyde in the 1930s. He once got a man to confess to a murder over the phone by asking,
"Is this the first time you ever killed anybody?"
Yes, sir. First time.
So great questioning. Inspector Harry Holmes is watching the Oswald interrogation.
He was quite composed. Oswald answered readily those questions that he wanted to answer. He could cut off, just like with a knife, anything that he didn't want to answer. He was not particularly obnoxious. He seemed to be intelligent. He talked with his hands all the time. He was handcuffed, but he was quiet. He was very definite with his talk and his eyes and his head.
Did you win any medals for rifle shooting in the Marines?
Just the usual medals.
For what?
I got an award for marksmanship.
3 policemen are standing in the front of the open front door to Ruth Payne's house. 3 more are covering the back door, and Ruth comes out to the porch.
We have Lee Oswald in custody. He's charged with shooting an officer.
Ruth lets the policeman in and introduces them to Marina. Marina then watches them in a cold sweat as they search the house.
Robert Oswald is on the expressway from Denton to Dallas, driving at top speed away from a car that in his rear-view mirror he can see is gaining on him. Could it be the FBI or someone who's recognized him as Lee's brother? The car pulls level, and Robert recognizes two executives from work. They wave at him to pull over.
Meanwhile, on Air Force One, Lyndon Johnson has asked Press Secretary Matt Kilduff to make sure there's press on board to witness the swearing-in. Johnson spots the official White House photographer, Cecil Thornton.
Where do you want us, Claude?
On the side of the Dallas Expressway, the two Acme brick bosses are asking if Robert Oswald would like them to go with him to Dallas to help. Robert can't answer for a moment, and his eyes fill with tears at their kindness, and says this is something he has to do alone. Before driving off, the men give him their telephone numbers and $70.
I don't know whether those men realized how much their wild ride out on the expressway that afternoon meant to me. I know how strong a revulsion people feel towards any assassin, and I had seen how shocked even Kennedy's critics were by his death. But in those first hours, I had seen no sign of hostility toward me in the faces of anyone I talked to. Partly because of that friendly gesture, I made up my mind to solve the mystery of what happened on Dealey Plaza. If Lee were innocent, I would do everything to free him. If he were guilty, I would try to find out why he had fired those shots.
Well, the question of why Oswald fired those shots, Professor Tony Badger, listening here live, do we really have any idea 50 years on?
I think so. He wanted to go to Cuba. He'd been to Mexico City a few weeks before to try and get a visa, and the Cubans had refused to give him one. He believed that if he shot Kennedy, he would be a hero to Castro, and he would be a hero to the Cubans, and they would let him go into the country.
He miscalculated even that.
Yes, he got virtually everything wrong all the time.
Did he think he ever could get away with this, though?
He thought he could get... He was on his way to the bus station to get the bus to Mexico City.
Yeah, I mean, his coolness when he stopped and so on, almost as if he wants to be caught.
Yes, yeah.
And how much planning had gone into all of it?
Very little. And he only knew that the president's motorcade was going the right way very quickly.
OK, well, now in downtown Dallas, nightclub owner Jack Ruby is at his sister Eva's apartment. He's sitting in a chair and crying as he watches the television news. He's clutching a small picture of Jack Kennedy.
I never felt so bad in my life. Even when Ma and Pa died, someone tore my heart out.
Ruby has an unpredictable sense of right and wrong. When one of his strippers was given a black eye by her husband, the next time he came to the club, Ruby beat him up and threw him down the stairs, despite the fact the girl was begging him not to. His sister Eva is watching him and thinking she's never seen him so out of it.
2 days later, Jack Ruby would kill Lee Harvey Oswald in the police department basement. Bob Hoffaker of KRLD would be there, a few feet away. Bob knew Jack Ruby and dismisses any motive other than Ruby wanted to be famous for being the man who killed the president's assassin.
Jack Ruby was just a little leftover character, and certainly nobody's conspiracy partner, and nobody's assassin. Nobody would have asked Jack Ruby to do anything that involved the keeping of a secret. There's no way Jack Ruby had any motives beyond the rather sad wish to be somebody, to be seen and heard.
At Love Field, federal judge Sarah T. Hughes has arrived on Air Force One to administer the oath of office. Someone hands her a card with the oath typed out. She finds Lyndon Johnson and his wife.
I didn't have anything to say because there didn't seem to be anything that could be said at such a moment. I've known the Vice President for a good many years, and Lady Bird too, so I leaned over and kissed them both.
Clint Hill has been summoned by Jackie to see her in the presidential cabin. She takes both his hands.
What's going to happen to you now, Mr. Hill?
I'll be okay, Mrs. Kennedy. I'll be okay.
His eyes fill with tears. He recalls their special friendship.
We became very close friends, and she relied on me a great deal. I don't know if you could say that I loved her. That's a very strong emotion. I guess maybe as a friend, I knew her secrets and she knew mine.
Admiral Berkeley, JFK's doctor, is still sitting with the casket, his black medical bag, with its now unnecessary medicines not far away.
Close by, Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers, both part of the so-called Irish mafia that surround Kennedy, are finding the situation on Air Force One increasingly hard to bear. JFK had been their friend since the 1940s. Powers had first met him when he knocked on the door of his third-floor Boston tenement flat.
My name is Jack Kennedy. I'm a candidate for Congress. Will you help me?
Years later, JFK said to Powers,
"If I had gotten tired that night when I reached the second floor, I would never have met you."
Well, joining us now is another special music guest, Alfie Boe. Traditional Irish lament, this one. Danny boy, Alfie, what a song.
It's an amazing song for an amazing man. Yeah.
Do go ahead and sing it on this extraordinary anniversary.
The pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the roses falling. 'Tis you must go and I must bide. But come me back when summer's in the meadow, or when the valley's hushed and white with snow. 'Tis I'll be in sunshine or in shadow. Oh, Danny boy, I love you so. When all the flowers are dying, if I am dead, as dead I well may be, you'll come and find the place where I am lying. And say an Ave there for me, and I shall hear those soft you tread above me, and all my grave will warm a sweeter beam, and then you'll kneel and whisper that you love me, and I shall sleep in peace until you come to me.
The traditional Irish lament, Danny Boy, sung live to us by Alfie Boe, but also the bagpipes you heard played there by Bruce Cowie. Thank you, Bruce. On the other side of the studio, he played at the funeral of John F. Kennedy because Mr. Kennedy had said he loved the bagpipe music. It's BBC Radio 2.
It's 2:35 in Dallas. 26 people are squeezed in the small stateroom of Air Force One, where Lyndon B. Johnson is about to be sworn in as the 36th President of the United States by his old friend, Sarah T. Hughes. It's hot and stuffy. The blinds are down and there's still no air conditioning. When Johnson walks in, it seems to his aides as if he's become a different man, somehow taller and more statesmanlike.
There's no sign of Jackie Kennedy, and Johnson is keen to have her in the official photograph. He calls out to Kenny O'Donnell.
Do you want to ask Mrs. Kennedy if she would like to stand with us?
O'Donnell doesn't move. Johnson glares at him, furious.
She said she wants to be here when I take the oath. Why don't you see what's keeping her?
O'Donnell reluctantly heads towards Jackie's bedroom. UPI reporter Meriden Smith notes that when she arrives, Jackie is dried-eyed, but her face is a mask of shock. Johnson takes her by the hand and guides her to stand next to him.
Judge Sarah T. Hughes speaking a few months later.
She was extremely calm. You could tell that she was grief-stricken, but she had complete control of herself. I asked the Vice President to put his hand on the Bible and to raise his right hand and repeat the oath after me.
Standing on the sofa with his back to the wall, the White House photographer Cecil Stoughton captures the scene. Johnson has his hand on JFK's Catholic missal, not a Bible as Judge Hughes thought. On his right side is his wife, Lady Bird. On his left, Jackie, her hair falling across her face, still wearing her blood-stained suit. Press officer Matt Kilduff is recording the occasion on a basic dictaphone he'd found on JFK's desk on the plane.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. And will to the best of my ability. Preserve. Protect. Defend. The Constitution of the United States.
So we have that crackly tape of the moment and the unforgettable photograph. What sort of president will Lyndon B. Johnson become? Here's Dallas journalist Darwin Payne.
Johnson was, at that time, more conservative than Kennedy, and when he assumed the Kennedy mantle, I didn't have a great deal of faith in what he would do, and moreover, his personal appearance, his speaking style was not very effective, and yet I'm now pleased to say that he became a very important and effective president. I think he did a great job.
Just a reminder that much of what you're hearing as an underscore tonight has been specially written for this programme by our musical director Mike Dixon, who's right here with us. It's being provided live by 22 wonderful musicians who are surrounding us here in the studio with new arrangements for virtually all of tonight's live music by Jennifer Green. So thank you to them. This is the Assassination of JFK, minute by minute on BBC Radio 2. With me once more, a writer Bonnie Greer and Professor Tony Badger. And JFK and LBJ, as they're both called, so different, Tony.
Completely different, particularly in dealings with Congress. And Johnson goes on to be the most effective president in terms of getting legislation through Congress than any other president except Franklin Roosevelt.
What's his... I mean, you say that. What's his legacy like? How's he seen from the American people?
Well, you ought to ask Bonnie.
That's a good question for Bonnie.
I'm an American people. His legacy in terms of Vietnam, which my generation remembers, is dreadful. It ruined his legacy for many, many years. But now I think as my generation gets older, we realize that I wouldn't have been in university if it wasn't for LBJ. LBJ made it possible for people like me from poor working class background to get a university degree. My mother is getting care because of LBJ. People were given homes who could never possibly have a home because of LBJ. And black people and Latino people can vote because of LBJ.
Not bad for a one-term president.
Absolutely.
You're listening to BBC Radio 2, The Assassination of JFK, minute by minute.
So, 2:39. Air Force One is in the air heading for Washington. Jackie Kennedy is sat next to her husband's casket. Kenny O'Donnell is with her.
Oh, Kenny, what's going to happen?
You want to know something, Jackie? I don't give a damn.
40,000 feet below them, every US Air Force base on their route is on red alert. Fighter pilots are sitting in their cockpits.
Meanwhile, unnerving police officers are still searching Ruth Payne's house. Guy Rose is on the phone to Captain Fritz at the police department, who tells him to ask Marina if her husband owns a rifle. Ruth immediately says no, he hasn't, but then translates the question to Marina. Marina says something in Russian to Ruth, who, clearly shocked, says,
Yes, he does have a rifle.
Holding baby June, Marina leads the police to the garage where the Oswalds store their belongings. She points to the blanket on the floor. A policeman picks it up and it hangs limp in his arms. There's nothing in it. Marina gasps. She knows now her husband shot the president.
Hugh Ainsworth was one of the first people to interview Marina Oswald.
She was scared to death that the government was going to either charge her with complicity or send her back to Russia. It was a terrible situation for her. And from all the evidence that when she talked to investigative people, she told us all at that time that he was guilty. I don't know when she changed her mind about his innocence or guilt, but I know for 20 years almost, she told me that several times, that she knew he'd done it.
Seated by the casket of the dead president, Jackie, Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers are having what O'Donnell feels is a proper Irish wake full of sentimental stories. Powers describes to Jackie her husband's last visit to his father Joe the previous month and how on leaving he'd kissed his father's forehead, then returned to do it once more, as if he felt he'd never see him again.
O'Donnell tells her when her husband visited the grave of their baby son Patrick that same weekend, he'd said, looking at the grave,
"He seems so alone here."
I'll bring them together now.
Jackie decides there and then to have Patrick's body moved to Arlington Cemetery, where Jack will be buried.
Coming up to 2:45, Dallas time. The news of the assassination has spread round the world. Speaking on the BBC, Prime Minister Sir Alec Douglas-Home said President Kennedy died when he bore on his shoulders all the cares and hopes of the world.
At the American Embassy in London, people queue to express their condolence, many of them Americans wanting to feel closer to home.
Well, I can only say I'm heartbroken, but completely and utterly heartbroken.
I'm so ashamed of my... I'm so ashamed of America. That some nut would do this to this man.
And my sympathies with Mrs. Kennedy couldn't be... I came here to sort of feel closer to her.
You know, I hope maybe it'll wake up America that... Maybe he didn't die in vain. Maybe it'll mean progress in some way.
In the Soviet Union, radio and TV programs have been interrupted and solemn organ music is being played. In West Berlin, the mayor, Willy Brandt, declared that a light has gone out for all men who hope for peace and freedom and a better life. He's asked Berliners to put a candle in their windows in tribute. One woman spoke to the BBC.
The people here in this city, they especially were shocked because they regard Kennedy as their man. And they knew that he was the only man in the West who would protect them in their struggle for freedom.
In France, President de Gaulle declared that JFK died like a soldier under fire for his duty and in the service of his country. The Prime Minister of Canada, Lester Pearson, spoke to the nation.
When a free man falls courageously in action, all freedom grieves, but courage is made easier for others. When a young man and a good man is stricken, we all feel a little older, but we have a deeper resolve to be better ourselves.
So, how did the death of JFK change America, if at all? Bonnie and Professor Tony Badger are still with us. Bonnie, what did change?
I think that my generation became suspicious of what I call the official version. Even if you take whatever arc of the political sort of arc you want to put you on, left, right, center, none of us actually believe what we're told officially by anyone. Even as we get older, we're still the same children sitting there, listening to our adults tell us what's happened, but we don't buy it. We still don't buy it.
Especially then after JFK, Robert Kennedy, and then Martin Luther King.
Yeah, we're a very, very skeptical, angry generation.
Okay, thank you.
Well, many songs were written about Kennedy after his death, but perhaps the most famous of all was Abraham, Martin and John, written by Dick Holler. Bonnie and I were talking about earlier about how much we love this song, because it links Kennedy's death with Abraham Lincoln's, with Martin Luther King's, and Bobby Kennedy, mentioned in the last verse, who this time 50 years ago was preparing to meet his brother's body at Andrews Air Force Base. Originally made famous by Marvin Gaye. You're going to love this, but it's so painful to hear it now. Abraham, Martin and John is sung live by David McCalmont.
Has anybody here seen my old friend Abraham? Won't you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, but I guess the good die young. I just looked around and he was gone. Is there anybody here seen my old friend John? Can you tell me where he's gone? You know, he freed a lot of people, but I guess the good die young. Oh, I Does anybody here see my old friend Martin? Can you tell me where he's gone? He freed a lot of people, but I guess the good die young.
Abraham, Martin and John. Bonnie Greer. Come on, tell us what you thought of that. Wasn't that unbelievable? I'm crying here.
Well, I mean, that's what the whole thing is about. If we had just... That song summed up the whole program. Everybody was cooking on that.
Well, it's Abraham and Martin and John, i.e. JFK, and then Bobby. Thank you so much, David. That was overwhelming. Let's have some comments from... The people listening.
So many people listening. Thank you. Mary says, I was at boarding school in Twickenham with my sister. We'd just returned from Virginia, USA 2 months earlier. We were taken to one side, quietly told the horrific news. Our parents were still over there, so you can imagine their concern. So obviously they were caught up in all the frenzy that was going on in the US.
Yeah, what's incredible is how many people over... I mean, when I was growing up, it was one of those things that people always said, yo, I remember when I was there, when it happened. And I suppose for my generation, it's 9/11. You know, you always remember where you were when 9/11 happened. But what's incredible is how many people over here were affected by it. I mean, like I mentioned earlier on, when he came to Ireland, he did this incredible whistle-stop tour in June of '63. And Pat Mock texted in saying, growing up in Dublin, Ireland, I remember this sad day. My late mother had taken us into the city 5 months earlier to stand for hours to see the great man drive through the streets. I only managed to see his head through the hundreds of people that were there. It's incredible just how people remember it.
The world just grew up in a second, Bonnie, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember, well, you guys wouldn't, but, JFK was a rock star. And then suddenly, it was TV. There were only 3 stations. And this was the first time that TV did rolling news. This was 4 days, 24/7, all over the world. There was nothing else on the air.
Well, we can pick up on that because we didn't really talk about Zabruda earlier on, but it's extraordinary that this was the first footage we've ever seen of anything approximating this, you know? Tony?
Yeah, and Life magazine published it almost immediately. It became the basis of the Warren Commission. I mean, it was later on people would be used to this sort of instant analysis.
And like you said, Bonnie, you just saw it again and again.
Listen, I know kids who were 5 years old who remember it because they were sitting in front of the TV, and that's really what it's about. It was the TV.
And that's what we're hearing. Do you still do the what if this didn't happen, Bonnie, in your head? Do you still run through it or not?
No, because in a way I was too young to think about it post in that way. I had no idea of the world before JFK, so I couldn't actually imagine it with him in it. That was just the end. It was the end.
A lot of comments about the music. Vicky says, Alfie and Bruce have moved me to tears. Hashtag R2JFK. Gareth Herford says, oh my, the hairs on the back of my neck are up. Bravo for Minute by Minute Kennedy. The JFK music is wonderful. Danny Boy and so on. And I can't wait to see all the comments on Abraham, Martin and John that we're going to get. So let's look at what happened to the people at the heart of this story. Jackie plunged herself into shaping her husband's legacy, and although their marriage wasn't perfect, she was aware of JFK's womanizing. It was Jackie who, within a week of the assassination, compared the end of the Kennedy White House to the end of Camelot. Jackie died of cancer in May 1994 and was buried next to Jack at Arlington Cemetery.
Her daughter Caroline went on to study at Harvard and Columbia and published books on constitutional law. She carries on her mother's work of keeping her father's name alive. She's married with 2 girls, Rose and Tatiana, and a son, John, named after her father. And she's just been named Ambassador of Japan.
John Jr. went on to follow his sister into law and serve for 4 years as a prosecutor in Manhattan's District Attorney's Office. On the 16th of July 1999, John Jr., his wife and his sister-in-law were killed when the light plane he was piloting crashed into the sea off Martha's Vineyard.
In March 1968, Robert Kennedy announced his candidacy for president in the same room where JFK had 8 years earlier. On the 6th of June, having just won the California primary, Robert Kennedy was shot dead himself, aged only 42. He too was buried at Arlington Cemetery.
John Connolly went on to serve 2 more terms as governor. He died in 1993 of pulmonary fibrosis, a disease that involves scarring of the lungs. His wife Nellie is convinced it was caused by the damage done to the slivers of bone that were shattered by Oswald's bullet.
Lee Harvey Oswald was shot dead by Jack Ruby as he was being transferred from the Dallas police station to the county jail. Oswald was treated at Parkland by many of the same surgeons who tried to save the life of the president 48 hours earlier.
In 1965, Marina Oswald remarried, and for many years she worked as a shop assistant in a Dallas store. Although she was initially convinced that Lee was guilty of assassinating Kennedy, Marina now believes he was completely innocent.
Jack Ruby was convicted of committing murder with malice and sentenced to death. His lawyers appealed and a new trial date was set. But by then, Ruby had been diagnosed with cancer. He died on the 3rd of January 1967 in the same hospital as JFK and Oswald, the Parkland.
For many years, Secret Service agent Clint Hill was plagued by drink problems and nightmares about the assassination. He continued to feel guilty that he could have saved the president if he'd been standing on the back of the car. Then, in 1990, Hill visited the 6th floor of the book depository for the first time. Looking out of the window, he could see Oswald had a perfect line of sight, and that agents on the back of the president's car would have made little difference. Hill left believing he'd done the best he could on that dreadful day in Dallas.
And Clint Hill is still alive, has been giving interviews, and I saw him just yesterday on the television saying how much he regretted the way he had behaved on that day, and it's so painful that he carries it with him still.
Absolutely. And you see that desperate scene, though, that footage we've seen all the time, Jackie on the back of the car and him rushing towards her and, as you say, wishing that he'd been there earlier.
Absolutely.
Exactly 50 years ago, Air Force One, carrying the body of the dead president, is climbing to an altitude of 40,000 feet. Jackie is still wearing the pink dress covered in her husband's blood. On the floor next to her, her husband's casket. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, is preparing his speech for the waiting press in Washington. JFK's aides and friends are contemplating a future without their leader. Beneath them, millions of Americans are glued to their television sets and radios, struggling to come to terms with the news that a loner with a grudge and a second-hand rifle has killed their young president, a leader so full of promise, who'd inspired the whole world with his oratory.
I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The Assassination of JFK Minute by Minute was presented by Jeremy Vine, Dermot O'Leary and Louise Minchin. It featured the voices of Kelly Burke, William Hope, Simon Lee Phillips, Sasha Pick and Trevor White, with casting by Elizabeth Allard. The studio managers were Joe Mifflin, Gareth Isles and Rupert Flint. The musical director was Mike Dixon, with arrangements by Jennifer Green. It was produced by Jonathan Mayo and Phil Critchlow at TBI Media.